They say a room full of people is the loneliest place on earth. That night, Caleb Parker walked into a hall packed with 200 strangers and felt every single one of them. The noise, the laughter, the performance of it all. He wanted to turn around and drive back to his daughter, his couch, his quiet grief. But then he saw her. Standing alone near the back wall, a woman in a dark blazer, her chin lifted just slightly too high, like she was daring the room to say something, and the room, unfortunately, was saying plenty. If you've ever been the person everyone looks at but no one actually sees, stay with me. This story is for you. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this one travels. And if it moves you, you'll know when to hit like. Caleb Parker had not wanted to come. That was the truth of it, plain and unglamorous. He had wanted to sit on his worn-out couch with a reheated plate of pasta and watch something on television that required absolutely zero emotional investment. A nature documentary, maybe, or one of those competition shows where people yelled at each other about cooking. Something that had nothing to do with him, nothing to do with his life, nothing to do with the particular brand of exhaustion that had settled into his bones over the past 4 years like sediment at the bottom of a river. His daughter had other ideas. Dad. Lily had appeared in the doorway of the living room that Thursday evening, 8 years old, and already carrying herself with the kind of quiet authority that made Caleb think she was going to run a corporation someday, or a small country. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown, patient, seeing everything. You told Mrs. Kowalski you'd go. I said I'd think about it. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm still thinking. Lily had crossed her arms. She was wearing her pajamas, the ones with the little foxes on them, and her hair was still damp from her bath. She looked so much like her mother in that moment that it hit him somewhere under his sternum, that familiar ache that never fully announced itself, just arrived and made itself at home. Dad, she said again, softer this time, you never go anywhere. He didn't have an answer for that, because she wasn't wrong. Since Sarah died, 4 years, 2 months, and some number of days he had stopped counting because counting made it worse, Caleb's world had shrunk to 3 reliable coordinates. His apartment on Briar Street, the elevator repair company where he'd worked for 9 years, and Lily's school. That was it. That was the whole map of his existence. He got up, he worked, he picked Lily up, he cooked something, he slept, and then he did it again. It wasn't living, exactly, but it was surviving, and for a long time, surviving had been enough. It's a networking event, he said, mostly to himself. I don't even know what I'm supposed to network about. I fix elevators. Mrs. Kowalski said it's good for the community. Mrs. Kowalski also said her cat can predict rain. Sprinkles has been right twice. Caleb looked at his daughter, this small, serious, impossibly perceptive human being he had somehow kept alive and functional for 8 years, and he felt the familiar collapse of whatever resistance he'd built up. Fine, he said. 1 hour. Lily smiled. It was Sarah's smile, too. That one always got him. He showered, changed into the least wrinkled button-down he owned, and drove to the Millbrook Community Center on a cold October evening, telling himself the whole way that he'd stay exactly 60 minutes, speak to exactly enough people to qualify as attending, and then go home and eat that pasta. The parking lot was already half full when he arrived. Through the glass double doors, he could see the warm glow of string lights someone had strung up along the ceiling, the movement of bodies, the shimmer of name tags catching light. He sat in his truck for a moment, engine off, hands on the steering wheel. He thought about Sarah. Not the end of it, not the hospital and the paperwork and the weeks afterward that he still couldn't fully reconstruct, but an earlier version of her, the one who used to drag him to things like this, block parties, charity dinners, neighborhood meetings. She had been the social engine of their marriage, the one who remembered birthdays and started conversations and made people feel seen within minutes of meeting them. He had always been happy to stand in her orbit. Now he didn't have an orbit. He just had a parking lot and 60 minutes and a daughter who believed in him more than he deserved. He got out of the truck. Inside, the hall was the particular chaos of 200 people who mostly knew each other but were pretending to be excited about the ones they didn't. There were folding tables covered in white tablecloths, a long buffet along one wall with trays of finger food that no one had quite figured out how to eat elegantly, and a DJ in the corner playing something upbeat that nobody was dancing to. The air smelled like coffee and someone's very aggressive cologne. Caleb grabbed a name tag from the registration table. Caleb, written in black marker by someone who had run out of enthusiasm by the second letter, and stuck it crookedly to his chest. A woman at the table handed him a printed schedule and a lanyard with a number on it. "The pairing activity starts at 7:30, she said brightly. "Find your match number. It's on the back of your lanyard. That's your conversation partner for the opening exercise." Caleb flipped the lanyard over. "Number 14. He pocketed it and looked out at the room. For a few minutes, he did what he always did at things like this. He stood slightly off to one side and watched. It was an old habit, more useful than it looked. Years of working in buildings, figuring out what was wrong with the system before touching a single component. You watched first. You listened. You let the thing tell you what it needed. What the room told him was, everyone here already has someone to talk to. He was halfway to convincing himself that pasta was the superior option when he saw her. She was standing near the back wall, slightly apart from the nearest cluster of people. With a glass of water, she didn't seem particularly interested in drinking. She was dressed well. Dark blazer, simple black blouse, the kind of put together that suggested she did this professionally, and her posture was the particular stillness of someone who has decided that if they don't move, they can be invisible. She couldn't, though, be invisible. Caleb noticed the scar before he understood what he was looking at, a pale, curved line that traced from just below her left cheekbone down to her jaw. Not hidden, not dramatically displayed, just there, the way a fact is just there. Her hair was pulled back, which meant it was fully visible, and as he watched, he saw the moment she realized someone 2 tables over had noticed it, the slight tightening around her eyes, the infinitesimal lift of her chin. Around her, the room carried on. A man in a blue blazer said something to his companion, and both of them glanced in her direction and then away, quickly, with the practiced casualness of people who thought they were being subtle. A woman in a red dress steered her friend away from the back wall with a gentle pressure on the arm that probably didn't even register as conscious. A group of 3 men near the buffet table laughed at something, and one of them tilted his head just slightly toward the woman with the scar, and the others looked, and the laughter continued. None of it was loud. None of it was even, technically, directed at her. That was the particular cruelty of it, the way cruelty in adult social spaces rarely announces itself. It just accumulates, like water damage, invisible, until suddenly there's a stain you can't get rid of. The woman with the scar didn't react. She raised her water glass, took a measured sip, and looked straight ahead with eyes that were carefully, professionally blank. Caleb had seen that look before. Not on a stranger. On himself in the bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning in the months after Sarah died, when he was getting ready for work and had to find a face to wear for the day. That particular look of a person holding everything together through the sheer force of not letting anything show. He picked up a glass of water from the nearest table, something to do with his hands, and made his way slowly toward the back wall. He wasn't sure why. He hadn't planned it. There was no internal monologue about doing the right thing or making someone feel included. He just moved, the way you move towards something without fully deciding to, the way you sometimes take the long way home and don't realize until you're already there. He stopped a few feet away from her and looked out at the room from that angle, as though he were surveying the same landscape she was. "The finger food situation is pretty dire," he said, not looking at her. A pause. Then, "The bruschetta is acceptable." Her voice was lower than he'd expected, measured, like she'd thought carefully about each word before releasing it. "High bar," he said. "I've been to worse events." "What made them worse?" Another pause, longer this time. He looked over and found her looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Not hostile, not warm, somewhere in that careful middle distance of a person who hasn't decided yet. "One of them had a mandatory trust fall," she said. Caleb winced. "That is worse." Something shifted very slightly at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, the suggestion of one. "Victoria Sterling," she said, and extended her hand. "Caleb Parker." He shook it. Her grip was firm, efficient. "You look like you'd rather be somewhere else." I look like that everywhere, she said. It's not personal. Good to know. He glanced at her name tag. No company listed, just her name. What do you do, Victoria Sterling? I run a company. What kind? Technology consulting, infrastructure management. She said it the way people say things they've said 1,000 times, not bored exactly, but automatic. You? I fix elevators. She looked at him. It was a genuine look this time, curious in a way that made him think most people at events like this did not in fact fix elevators. That's not what I expected you to say, she said. Most people expect something more. He searched for the word horizontal. Horizontal. Like a career that moves across a landscape. Mine moves up and down. She considered this. That's either a very good answer or a terrible one. Little of both, he admitted, and that was the moment the evening stopped being something he was enduring and became something else entirely. He couldn't have named it then. He just knew that for the first time in a long time, he was having a conversation that felt like an actual conversation, not a performance, not a transaction, not two people exchanging biographical data like trading cards. The pairing activity started at 7:30, as the woman at the registration table had promised. An event coordinator with a microphone and the enthusiasm of someone who had consumed a dangerous amount of coffee explained the format. Find your numbered match, introduce yourself, and spend 15 minutes discussing your greatest professional challenge and how you'd approached it. 14, the coordinator called out. Who's got 14? Caleb raised his lanyard. And 14's match, 22. Victoria looked down at the lanyard around her own neck, then up at Caleb. 22, she said. Guess we're stuck with each other. Guess so. From across the room, someone laughed. A brief, poorly concealed burst of amusement that seemed to come from the direction of the blue blazer man. Caleb caught it, understood immediately what it meant, and felt something cold and uncomplicated settle in his chest. Victoria had heard it too. Her face didn't change. That was the worst part. The practiced nature of her non-reaction, the way she'd clearly had to make it automatic. They found a pair of chairs near the windows and sat down, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Outside, the parking lot was dark, the streetlights making orange pools on the wet asphalt. It had started to rain at some point while they were inside. You don't have to do this, Victoria said quietly. The pairing was random. You can say you couldn't find your match. Caleb looked at her. Why would I do that? Because... She stopped, started again. Some people prefer not to. Not to what? She met his eyes directly for the first time, and there was something in her expression, something that had moved past careful and into the territory of a person who is simply too tired to pretend they don't know what they're talking about. Not to be seen talking to me. It reflects on them socially, apparently. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He thought about the man in the blue blazer. He thought about the group near the buffet. He thought about all the invisible architecture of exclusion that he'd watched her navigate in the 20 minutes since he'd first seen her standing by that back wall. Those people, he said, have never been stuck in a broken elevator. She frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means when you're stuck in a small space with a problem, you can't afford to care what anyone else thinks about how you look handling it. You either fix the thing or you don't. He shrugged. I've been fixing things my whole life. I don't have a lot of patience left over for worrying about social optics. Victoria studied him for a long moment. That's either a very good answer or a terrible one, she said again. You already used that line. It still applies. And for the first time since he'd seen her standing by that wall, holding herself together with both hands, invisible in a room full of people, Victoria Sterling almost smiled. Not the careful, controlled near smile from before. Something more fragile and more real, something that looked like it surprised her as much as it surprised him. The 15-minute activity stretched to 40. The coordinator called time twice, and they ignored her both times, talking past the format, past the professional challenge prompt, past the careful small talk that people did at events like this. It wasn't that they ran out of safe topics and stumbled into honest ones. It was more that the honest ones arrived naturally, the way they do when two people discover, mid-conversation, that they are speaking the same private language. She told him about the company she'd built from a two-person consulting firm to a 40-employee operation over 7 years. She talked about it the way someone talks about something they're genuinely proud of but have stopped expecting other people to be impressed by, straightforwardly, with specifics, without performance. She mentioned the literacy programs her company funded for underprivileged children in the district, dropped it in almost as an aside, didn't elaborate. "Wait," he said. "Back up. Literacy programs? We fund 3 of them. Reading support for kids who are behind grade level, mostly in the East Side schools." She shrugged slightly. I'm not mentioning it for any particular reason. It's just part of the budget." "Why reading specifically?" She looked at the window for a moment. "I had a teacher in 5th grade who wouldn't give up on me. When everything else was very loud, she was very quiet, and she made me believe that books were a place I could go." A beat. "Not every kid has that. I can fund it, so I do." Caleb thought about Lily, about the stack of books on her nightstand that she consumed at an alarming rate, about the way she'd cried, actually cried, when she finished Charlotte's Web last spring, and how he'd sat on her bed for an hour afterward talking about it. He thought about how much of who his daughter was lived in those books, in that capacity for feeling that reading had given her. "My daughter's going to be a writer," he said. "Or a scientist. She hasn't decided. She thinks she might do both." "How old is she?" 8, going on 45. Victoria's expression did something complicated. Warmed, somehow, but with a layer of something underneath it that he couldn't read yet. "She sounds remarkable." "She is. She's the reason I came tonight, actually. She told me I never go anywhere." He paused. She was right. "How long has it been?" Victoria stopped. 4 years, he said. "My wife. And yes, you can ask. Most people avoid it like it's contagious." She met his eyes. "I wasn't going to avoid it. I just didn't want to presume." Her name was Sarah. She had a brain aneurysm. It was very fast. He said it the way he'd learned to say it, with the facts in their proper order, because the facts were manageable even when nothing else was. She would have loved tonight. She was very good at this, walking into a room and making everyone feel like the room got better when she arrived. He looked out the window. "I've never been very good at that." "You walked over to me," Victoria said quietly. He looked back at her. "When everyone else—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "You walked over. That's not nothing." "It's just common decency," he said, uncomfortable suddenly with the weight she was giving it. "You'd be surprised," she said, "how uncommon common decency is." They were quiet for a moment. The DJ had switched to something slower, and a few couples had drifted toward what passed for a dance floor in the center of the room. The string lights made everything look warmer than it was. "The accident," Caleb said carefully. "If you want to tell me, you don't have to." She was quiet for long enough that he thought she'd decided not to. Then, "Car accident 6 years ago. The other driver ran a red light." She said it with the same factual precision he'd used about Sarah, the learned efficiency of a person who has told a story so many times they've found the shortest path through it. "I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. Surgery, recovery, all of it. And when I came out," she paused. "My fiancé was there for the first week, and then he wasn't." Caleb said nothing. Sometimes saying nothing was the more honest response. "He left a note," she said, which I've always found almost funny in retrospect. A note, like he was going on a trip. She looked down at her water glass. "He said he wasn't equipped for this, that he'd thought about it carefully, and he needed a life that was, I think the word he used was unburdened." "He was a coward," Caleb said. He didn't say it with heat, just as a statement of fact, the same way he'd describe a faulty cable or a misaligned counterweight. The thing was what it was. Victoria looked at him with an expression he still couldn't fully read. "Most people say something more diplomatic. Most people," he said, "aren't being honest." She was quiet. Outside, the rain had gotten heavier, streaking the windows in long diagonal lines. Inside, the room continued its noise and warmth and slight unreality. "After he left," she said, "other people followed. Not dramatically, just gradually. Invitations stopped coming. Friends got busy. I told myself it was coincidence for about 6 months, and then I stopped telling myself that. She turned her water glass slowly in her hands. I built the company during that time, actually. I had a lot of hours to fill. And the literacy programs. A very small pause. I figured if I couldn't, if my personal life was going to be what it was, I could at least make sure the professional one stood for something. Caleb looked at her. This woman who had been quietly building something meaningful in the margins of a life that had tried repeatedly to diminish her, who was sitting here in a room full of people who had spent the evening treating her like a cautionary tale, who had almost smiled at him twice and was now holding herself very still as though she wasn't sure what to do with the fact that someone was actually listening. He thought about what Lily would say if she were here. His daughter, who had Sarah's eyes and Sarah's ability to see exactly what a moment required. She'd say, "Pay attention, Dad. This one matters." He paid attention. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can try." "The literacy programs, you said you don't do it for recognition. Does anyone know that it's your company funding them?" She shook her head. "We file through a non-profit umbrella. The schools know they have funding. They don't know where it comes from." "Why not?" She seemed to find the question genuinely puzzling. "Because the point isn't the credit. The point is the kids getting the books." He nodded slowly. In his experience, and it was not inconsiderable experience, 9 years of going into buildings and fixing things that were broken, seeing what people were like in the moments they weren't performing. In his experience, the people who were loudest about their generosity were often the least generous. And the most generous people were usually doing something quiet in a corner that nobody ever heard about. He said as much. Victoria looked at him with an expression that was, for the first time all evening, entirely unguarded. It lasted only a second before the careful composure returned, but he saw it. The brief, undefended face of a person who had not been told anything kind about themselves in a very long time and didn't quite know what to do with it when it arrived. "That's," she started, stopped. "Thank you." "I'm not saying it to be kind," he said. "I'm saying it because it's true. There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment, then quietly, "Yes, there is." The event wound down around 9. People gathered coats and made promises to follow up that most of them wouldn't keep. The DJ played something conclusive. The buffet, depleted, sat under its warming lights like a small battlefield. Caleb and Victoria were still talking. They had covered, in the past hour and 40 minutes, the following territory: the specific logistical challenges of running a technology consulting company in a market that was oversaturated with larger competitors, the particular combination of skills required to diagnose a malfunctioning hydraulic elevator versus a traction elevator, which Caleb explained with more enthusiasm than he'd intended. The best books for an 8-year-old who was ready to start reading something with some weight to it, a topic on which Victoria had surprisingly precise opinions, and the question of whether the bruschetta had been acceptable or whether acceptable was too generous a word, which they had never fully resolved. They had not talked about the scar again. They had not talked about loneliness exactly, though the conversation had been threaded through with it the way certain rivers run underground, present, shaping the landscape, even when you couldn't see them directly. When the coordinator began collecting tablecloths, they finally stood. "I usually say it was nice to meet someone," Victoria said, gathering her coat. "I usually mean it approximately 30% of the time. And tonight?" She looked at him. "Tonight I mean it 100% of the time, which is unusual." "For me too," he said. And then, before he had time to overthink it, "Lily has a school reading fair in 2 weeks. It's very low stakes, just kids presenting their favorite books, but she'd be—" He stopped, reconsidered. "I'm sorry, I'd like that," Victoria said. He looked up. She was watching him with that careful expression, but the carefulness had shifted. Less defensive now, more deliberate. Like she was choosing consciously to mean what she was saying. "Really?" he said. "Caleb?" She said his name like she'd tested it and found it fit. "You're the first person who has spoken to me tonight without looking at my face like it's a problem to be solved. Yes, I would like to come to your daughter's reading fair." He gave her his number. She gave him hers. They walked out into the parking lot, where the rain had stopped and left the asphalt shining, and they went to their separate cars. Caleb sat in his truck for a moment before starting the engine. The radio was off. The parking lot was emptying out around him, headlights swinging through the dark. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the 4 years of silence that had followed her, the way his life had hollowed out so gradually he hadn't noticed until it was all hollow. He thought about Lily, saying you never go anywhere in her fox pajamas with her mother's patient eyes. He thought about a woman who funded literacy programs and told no one about it, who had rebuilt a career and a life from the wreckage of a year that would have ended most people, who stood at the back of rooms with her chin lifted slightly too high and her face carefully blank, and who had, in the span of 2 hours, shown him something real. He started the engine, pulled out of the lot, turned onto the wet road toward home. 60 minutes had turned into 2 hours and 23 minutes, and he hadn't once thought about the pasta. When he got home, Lily was still awake, technically asleep on the couch, but the kind of asleep where a person hears everything. She opened one eye when he came in. "Well?" she said. He took off his coat, hung it on the hook by the door, sat down in the armchair across from her. "There was a woman," he said. Lily opened both eyes. "She runs a company. She funds literacy programs and doesn't tell anyone. She has very specific opinions about books for 8-year-olds. He paused. "I told her about your reading fair." Lily sat up slowly. Her hair was a mess. She looked at him with her mother's eyes, those patient, seeing eyes that took everything in and gave very little back until they were ready. "Is she nice?" Lily asked. Caleb thought about it. Not the reflexive, reassuring kind of thinking, the real kind, the kind where you actually consider the question before you answer it. "I think," he said finally, "she's trying to be. And I think it costs her something every time, because people haven't made it easy." He looked at his daughter. "Does that make sense?" Lily considered this with the gravity of someone for whom the question was not abstract. "That's like when I try to make friends with the new kid at school," she said, "even if they're weird about it at first, because being new is hard." "Yeah," Caleb said. "Exactly like that." Lily lay back down and pulled her blanket up to her chin. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You should have asked for her number, Dad." "I did." A pause. "Okay," Lily said, satisfied. "Good." She was asleep in 3 minutes. Caleb sat in the armchair in the quiet apartment and listened to the sound of his daughter breathing and the distant sound of rain starting up again on the windows, and he didn't move for a long time. Outside, the city went on doing what cities do. Indifferent, continuous, full of people standing in rooms where nobody was looking at them right. Inside, for the first time in 4 years, 2 months, and some number of days he had stopped counting, Caleb Parker felt something shift. Not dramatically. Not like a door swinging open. More like a window, cracked just slightly, letting in a thin line of cold air that was, despite everything, unmistakably fresh. He wasn't sure what it meant yet. He wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time in a very long time, he was willing to find out. The reading fair was on a Saturday. Caleb had not told Lily much, just that someone he'd met at the networking event might come. A woman who worked in technology and knew a lot about books. He kept it simple because Lily was perceptive enough to construct an entire narrative from 3 words. And he wasn't ready for the narrative yet. He wasn't even sure what the narrative was. He just knew that Victoria had said she'd come, and that he'd found himself thinking about that fact more than was probably reasonable for a Tuesday, a Wednesday, and most of Thursday. He texted her the address on Friday morning, kept it brief. "Reading fair tomorrow, 10 a.m., Westbrook Elementary, room 14. No pressure if something came up." She replied within 4 minutes. "I'll be there." "Does she have a favorite genre?" "I want to bring something." He stared at that for a moment, then typed, "Mystery." "Anything with a puzzle in it. Good to know," she wrote back. And that was the whole exchange, clean and without ceremony, and for some reason it settled something in him that had been slightly unsettled all week. The fair itself was the organized chaos that elementary school events always were. Hand-drawn posters taped to the walls, children in their best clothes already wrinkled by 9:30, parents milling around with coffee cups they'd smuggled in against the sign at the door that said, "No outside beverages." Lily's presentation was on a book about a girl detective who solved crimes using meteorology, which Caleb had read 3 times because Lily had insisted he needed to understand the full context before she could practice her presentation on him. He understood the full context. He could probably have given the presentation himself. He saw Victoria before she saw him. She came through the door of room 14 at 10:05, wearing a dark green coat he hadn't seen before. Her hair down today rather than pulled back, and she stood in the doorway for a second, doing what he recognized as the same thing he always did: scanning, settling, finding the geography of a room before committing to it. She was carrying a paper bag from the bookstore on Clement Street. Caleb raised a hand. She found him, and the slight tension around her eyes eased by a fraction. "Hi," she said when she'd crossed the room. "Hi." He nodded at the bag. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." She glanced around the room. "Where is she?" He pointed. Lily was at her table near the window, explaining something to another child with the focused intensity of a person who had strong opinions about meteorological detective work and was not going to let the occasion pass without sharing them. She was wearing the blue dress Sarah's mother had given her for her birthday, and her hair was in 2 braids that Caleb had attempted and redone 4 times that morning. Victoria watched her for a moment without saying anything. "She looks like you," she said finally. "She looks like her mother," he said. "The expressions are mine, apparently. She makes this face when she's skeptical." He demonstrated a particular slight narrowing of the eyes and tilt of the head. "I've seen that face in the mirror my whole life." "She's using it right now," Victoria said, "on that poster about dinosaurs." He looked. Lily was, in fact, regarding a neighboring display with exactly that expression. He laughed. A real one, short and involuntary. It caught him off guard, the way genuine laughter sometimes did, arriving before you decided to let it. Victoria smiled, not the careful almost smile from the networking event. A real one, quick and a little surprised, like she hadn't expected him to laugh like that, and found it, what? Disarming, maybe, or just real. "Come on," he said. "I'll introduce you." Lily, to her credit, did not make a production of it. She shook Victoria's hand with the gravity of a child who had been told this was what adults did, said it was nice to meet her, and then immediately returned to the topic of her presentation because there were things about cumulonimbus clouds that her audience had not yet grasped. Victoria sat down in one of the small plastic chairs, the kind designed for 8-year-olds, which made her look slightly absurd, which she seemed aware of and entirely unbothered by, and listened to Lily's full explanation with the attentiveness of someone who was actually interested, asking 2 questions that made Lily's eyes go wide with the particular delight of a child who has been asked a genuinely good question. Caleb stood slightly back and watched the 2 of them. He didn't know what he'd expected. He hadn't let himself expect anything, specifically, because expecting things required a kind of hope that he'd gotten out of the habit of and hadn't yet found his way back into. But this, watching his daughter explain cumulonimbus clouds to a woman who was listening like it mattered, in a room full of hand-drawn posters and children in their best clothes, on a Saturday morning that smelled like coffee and library books. This was something he hadn't anticipated, and it had a quality to it that he filed away without looking at too closely. Later, in the parking lot, Lily unwrapped the book Victoria had brought, a mystery series Caleb hadn't heard of, about a 12-year-old who solved disappearances using botany, and held it with the focused reverence she reserved for new books, turning it over, reading the back, opening to the first page right there on the asphalt. "This looks really good," she said, without looking up. "I thought you might like it," Victoria said. "How did you know about this series?" "I read a lot." Lily looked up then, with an expression that was evaluative in the way only children can be, completely unfiltered, taking in information and processing it without any of the social machinery that adults use to disguise the fact that they're doing exactly the same thing. "Do you have favorites?" Lily asked. "Several." "What's your actual favorite, like, if you could only keep one book?" Victoria considered this seriously. Caleb appreciated that she didn't give a reflexive, crowd-pleasing answer. "A novel called Housekeeping," she said, by Marilynne Robinson. "It's about 2 sisters who have to figure out what home means when everything familiar is gone." Lily processed this. "That sounds sad." It is, a little, but it's also very beautiful. The sad and the beautiful are in it at the same time. Lily looked at her for another long moment, then at her father, then back at Victoria. Okay, she said, apparently having reached a conclusion. She went back to her book. Caleb looked at Victoria. She was looking at Lily with that expression again, but the complicated one, warm underneath, and something else on top of it, something he still didn't have the right word for. She's remarkable, Victoria said quietly. It was what she'd said at the networking event, when he'd described Lily in the abstract. Hearing her say it now, having actually met her, made it land differently. Made it land as a thing she meant. Yeah, he said. She is. They stood in the parking lot while Lily read, which was not a thing Caleb had planned, and which Victoria seemed perfectly comfortable with. The two of them standing in a light October wind while an 8-year-old read the first chapter of a botany mystery on a Saturday morning. It was a strange and unremarkable and somehow very specific kind of good. She asked me one really good question, Victoria said. Which one? She asked if botany was harder or easier than meteorology for solving mysteries. A pause. I said I thought they were differently hard, different kinds of observation. What did she say? Victoria smiled. She said that was a very diplomatic answer and she'd look into it herself. Caleb put his hand over his face for a moment. Yeah, he said. That's her. They made plans, loosely, to get coffee the following week. Not as anything declared or labeled, just coffee. A continuation of a conversation that had started at a networking event and kept finding reasons to continue. He drove home with Lily in the back seat reading, the radio on low, the city going past outside the windows, and thought about the word that had been sitting at the back of his mind all morning, the one he kept looking at from the side and not quite directly. Hope. That was the word. He didn't trust it yet, but it was there. The coffee happened on a Wednesday evening, after he'd picked Lily up from school and dropped her at his neighbor Mrs. Kowalski's apartment, which Lily considered a reasonable trade because Mrs. Kowalski owned 4 cats and an extensive collection of jigsaw puzzles. They met at a place on Fulton Street that was small and slightly too warm and had tables that wobbled if you put your elbows on them wrong. Caleb arrived first and took the table in the corner, which was his preference. Good sight lines back to the wall, a leftover habit from years of entering unfamiliar buildings professionally and needing to understand the space before working in it. Victoria arrived 7 minutes late, coat slightly damp from rain she'd apparently misjudged, and dropped into the chair across from him with the energy of a person who had already had a complicated day. Board meeting ran over, she said. Sorry. You okay? Define okay. She flagged down a server. Medium cortado, please. Then to Caleb, one of my senior partners wants to restructure the consulting division in a way that would cost us 3 junior positions. He's framed it as efficiency. It is not efficiency. It's a man who doesn't like that 2 of those junior positions are occupied by women who are better at the work than he is. She said it flatly, without drama. I said no. He called it emotional decision-making. I told him I'd look forward to his efficiency memo once he could demonstrate he understood the actual metrics, and then the meeting ended. Caleb looked at her. How often does that happen? The meeting running over, or men calling my professional judgment emotional? Second one. She picked up her coffee when it arrived. Often enough that I've stopped being surprised by it. Surprised is a luxury. You can only be surprised so many times before it becomes a choice, and I stopped making that choice a while ago. That sounds exhausting. It is. She said it simply, without self-pity. But the alternative is letting it in every time, and I can't run a company and also carry that. So, she shrugged. I put it in a box. Deal with the box on my own time. Do you actually deal with it? He asked. Or does the box just get heavier? She looked at him over her cup. It was the same look she'd given him at the networking event when he'd said something she hadn't expected. That brief recalibration, like she was adjusting the aperture on a lens. Probably the second one, she admitted, but I'm working on it. He nodded. He knew something about boxes. 4 years of them, stacked in the corner of a life that had gone very quiet. He'd told himself for a long time that he was managing them. He was only recently starting to understand that managing and actually opening were different activities. He told her about a job that week, a hydraulic elevator in a building in the Tenderloin, old system, piston corroded, the kind of repair that required working in a pit that was approximately the size of a large closet with someone else's grease on every surface. He'd spent 6 hours in that pit on Tuesday, and by the time he'd come up, his back ached in 4 distinct locations, and he'd had the particular bone-deep satisfaction of having fixed a thing that people depended on without ever thinking about it. People don't think about elevators, he said, until they don't work. Then it's the only thing they think about. That's true of most infrastructure, she said. Roads, water, power. We build our whole lives on top of systems we don't think about until they fail. Is that what your company does? The infrastructure management piece? We help companies understand what their critical systems are before they fail, she said. Preventive work, mostly. Identifying the vulnerabilities before they become crises. She paused. It's less dramatic than it sounds. No, it sounds exactly as dramatic as it is, he said. That's real work. She looked at him for a moment. Most people at the level I talk to are interested in what the company's worth, not what it does. I fix things for a living, he said. I'm always interested in what things do. It was a small thing, but something in her posture shifted, very slightly, almost imperceptibly, a release of something held. He noticed it because he'd become, over the past 2 weeks, unexpectedly attentive to the specific geography of how Victoria Sterling held herself. She had excellent posture, always, but it wasn't the natural kind. It was the maintained kind, the kind that required continuous, low-level effort, like keeping a door shut against wind pressure from the other side. And occasionally, in specific moments, the wind dropped, and the door settled back into its frame, and she looked different. Lighter, maybe. More like herself, whatever that fully was. He wanted to know what that fully was. He was aware that this wanting had grown considerably since a Wednesday evening 2 weeks ago when he'd almost not gotten out of his truck. They stayed at that wobbly table for 2 hours. The coffee shop filled up and thinned out around them. At some point, a group of college students took the table next to them and had an argument about a film that neither Caleb nor Victoria had seen, and they spent 20 minutes listening and quietly evaluating the arguments. And this sidebar, this minor shared entertainment at another table's expense, was somehow one of the more comfortable things Caleb had done with another person in years. Not performing conversation, just having it. She told him, at some point in the second hour, about Marcus. She didn't use the word fiancé immediately. She said, someone I was with first, in the way people do when they're testing whether a listener can handle the full weight of the thing before they commit to giving it. Caleb listened without reacting in a way that suggested he might be about to say something unhelpful, which seemed to be the right move because she continued. Marcus had been the kind of person, she said, who was very good at being present when things were good and notably absent when they weren't. She'd known this, on some level, even before the accident. He was charming, reliable, in the ways that were visible, and had a particular gift for making her feel like the center of attention in public while being fairly unreachable in private. She'd told herself this was just how some people were, that she could work with it. And then the accident happened, she said, and the private and the public collapsed into each other, and there was no more good time to wait for, and She stopped. He sat in the hospital room with me for 6 days. He held my hand. He told me everything was going to be fine. A beat. And then he left, and he took the version of the future I'd been building in my head for 3 years, and he took it with him, and I had to figure out what was left. What was left? Caleb asked. She thought about it, really thought about it. Which he'd noticed was how she answered questions that mattered, not fast, not reflexively, with actual consideration. The company, she said, and a very clear picture of which of my friends were actually my friends. A pause. It turned out to be a smaller number than I'd thought. People are frightened of visible damage. It reminds them that they're not immune to it. Some people, Caleb said. Most people, she said. Then after a moment, present company accepted, apparently. I've had my own visible damage, he said. Just the kind you can't see. She was quiet for a moment. Grief, she said. Yeah. Does it look like anything from outside? He thought about it. Probably just looks like a guy who fixes elevators and goes home. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. There's a version of being okay that's really just being very good at routine. I got really good at routine. Lily's school, work, the apartment, very reliable systems. He looked up. You'd appreciate the infrastructure. She didn't smile at that, but her eyes did something. And now? Now I'm at a coffee shop on a Wednesday, he said, willingly, which is something. The week after the coffee shop, he ran into a problem he hadn't anticipated. His name was Derek, and he was Caleb's coworker and closest thing to a friend at the company. A big, loud man with a loud laugh and strong opinions about sports teams and a genuinely good heart that he packaged in the particular bluntness of a person who had never found much use for subtlety. Derek found out about Victoria the way Derek found out about most things. Not through any deliberate disclosure, but because Caleb had mentioned the reading fair to someone at work, and that someone had mentioned it to Derek, who operated on a 1 degree of separation basis in all social contexts. Sterling, Derek said, appearing at Caleb's workbench on a Thursday morning with his arms crossed, and an expression that Caleb recognized as the expression of a person who has decided to say something, and has decided the best approach is to say it fast. Victoria Sterling, the one with the... He gestured vaguely at his own face. Yes, Caleb said. I heard her name in that building on Clement last year, Derek said. Some of the guys on the property management side were talking. Something about a contract dispute, I don't remember. But I remember they weren't... It wasn't friendly talk, is what I'm saying. People aren't always friendly about her, Caleb said, not looking up from the cable assembly he was checking. Cal. Derek sat down on the edge of the opposite workbench. I'm not saying anything about her specifically. I'm saying you've been gone a long time, man, and this is the first person you've... I just want to make sure you're not... I'm not what? Derek scratched the back of his neck. Being too... He searched for the word. Charitable. Because of... I don't know. Because of how people are treating her. Caleb looked up then. He looked at Derek, his friend, who was not a bad person, and who had just said something that landed badly and knew it. What you're describing, Caleb said carefully, is that my interest in her might be based on feeling sorry for her. I'm not saying that's what you're saying. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then, maybe. I've had 3 conversations with her, Caleb said. She runs a 40-person company. She funds literacy programs anonymously for kids in East Side schools. She asked Lily a genuinely good question about meteorology. She told me about a board meeting she had where she stood her ground on something real. He paused. None of that is charity. I'm interested in her because she's an interesting person. The scar is the least interesting thing about her. Derek absorbed this. He had the good grace to look slightly ashamed. Okay, he said. Fair. Derek. What? Next time you want to say something like that, maybe lead with, I'm happy for you, first. It makes the rest of it land better. Derek considered this. I am happy for you, he said. I'm also an idiot sometimes. Those 2 things coexist regularly, Caleb said. Derek laughed, and the tension eased, and they went back to work. And that was that. Or mostly that, because Derek's question, even wrong, even indelicate, had left a small stone in Caleb's shoe that he turned over on the drive home. Was he being charitable? Was there some part of him that was drawn to Victoria because of the loneliness he recognized in her, the way a person with an old fracture recognizes another person's limp? He thought about it honestly. He owed it that. The loneliness. Yes. He'd seen it at the networking event, and it had called to something in him, the recognition of a familiar country. But recognition wasn't the same as pity. He knew what pity felt like from the inside. He'd received it in quantity in the year after Sarah died, from well-meaning people who looked at him with that particular softness that meant, you poor man. And pity had never made him feel anything except more alone. What he felt when he talked to Victoria was the opposite of alone. He thought about the way she'd listened to Lily at the reading fair. Not the indulgent listening of a person tolerating a child, but real engagement, the follow-up questions, the serious answer about housekeeping and the coexistence of sad and beautiful. He thought about the coffee shop, the wobbly table, the college students arguing about a film, the two of them sitting in the middle of all of it without needing to make it more than it was. He thought about the way she'd said you walked over at the networking event, with the specific weight of a person identifying something she'd stopped expecting. No, he was not being charitable. He was being, for the first time in 4 years, interested. Genuinely, particularly interested in a person who was complicated and difficult and still choosing, every day, to be present in a world that hadn't been kind to her. That was not pity. That was something else, and it had been so long since he'd felt it that he'd almost not recognized it when it arrived. He picked up Lily from Mrs. Kowalski's that evening. She came out with cat hair on her sleeve and a completed puzzle of the Eiffel Tower under her arm, and she talked the whole way home about a book she'd started, The Botany Mystery, and how the main character had just discovered a clue in the root system of a rare fern, and what did he think about whether ferns could really provide forensic evidence, and could he look it up? "I'll look it up," he said. "Victoria would probably know," Lily said. "She's in technology, not botany." "She knows a lot of things," Lily said, with the assurance of someone who had spent 45 minutes with a person and formed a complete assessment. "Yeah," Caleb said. "She does." That weekend, Victoria called, not texted, called, which was its own small thing, and said she had a question. "There's a benefit dinner," she said, "for the Literacy Coalition. I usually go alone. I was thinking—" A pause. Not an uncertain pause, more the pause of a person who is proceeding despite uncertainty, which was different. "Would you want to come?" He noticed the specific way she'd said it. Not, "Would you like to?" or "I'd love it if." "Would you want to come?" Direct. No decorative language around it. "Yes," he said. Another pause. "It'll probably be... There will be people there who know me, and there will be people there who..." She stopped. "Who look at you the way people do," he said. "Yes." "Victoria." He leaned back against the counter. "I fixed elevators in a building on Market Street for 2 weeks last spring. The property manager referred to me as the elevator guy every single day. To my face. Not my name, the elevator guy." He paused. "I have been underestimated in rooms my entire life. I know how to be in a room where someone has already decided what I am." Silence on the line. "That's..." She stopped. "I'm not going to say that's not the same thing." "It's not the same thing," he agreed, "but the principle holds. I'm not going to fall apart in a room because someone doesn't think I belong there." Another silence. Then, quietly, "Okay. What should I wear?" "It's formal. I have one suit. Does it fit?" Within a reasonable margin of error, she made a sound, not quite a laugh, somewhere between a laugh and an exhale, the sound of a person releasing something they'd been holding. "That'll be fine," she said. "It'll be fine." He wasn't sure if she was talking about the suit. The dinner was 3 weeks away. In those 3 weeks, the thing between them, which had not been named, which was still in the tentative territory of two people circling something real without quite landing on it, continued to develop in the particular organic way that relationships do when neither person is forcing them. More texts. A Saturday afternoon walk along the Embarcadero when Lily was at a birthday party, and Caleb found himself with 4 unexpected hours. A phone call that started as a question about a recommendation for Lily's reading list and lasted an hour and 20 minutes. What he was learning slowly was the texture of who Victoria Sterling was away from the careful public-facing version. She was funny, not performed funny, not anecdote funny, but the drier, more specific kind of humor that arrived unexpectedly in the middle of serious sentences. She was blunt to a degree that would have been abrasive coming from someone who didn't also listen the way she listened, with the quality of attention that made you feel like what you were saying mattered beyond the immediate moment. She was private in ways that were obvious and transparent in ways that caught him off guard. She'd reveal something real almost accidentally, and then go quiet, as though she hadn't meant to let it land. She was also, he was discovering, afraid of things she would not name. He saw it in the way she talked about the benefit dinner, the way she'd mentioned that people would be there who knew her, who looked at her in certain ways and then had gone quiet. He saw it in the slight recalibration she did every time she entered a new space, the way she read a room before settling into it. He saw it in the evening she'd mentioned, almost in passing, that she hadn't been back to the Millbrook Community Center since the networking event. "Why would I be?" she'd said when he'd asked. "No reason," he'd said. "Just wondering if you'd gone to anything else in the series." "I went to one," she said. "That was enough." He'd let it go, but he'd stored it. The way she carried the memory of that evening, the crowd, the whispers, the elaborate indifference of 200 people who had looked at her and decided something. The way some rooms stayed with you long after you'd left them. He thought about this on the Wednesday before the benefit dinner, sitting in his truck in the parking lot of Lily's school, waiting for the 3:15 bell. He thought about the way certain wounds didn't announce themselves. You thought you were fine, and then a room reminded you of another room, and suddenly you were right back in the original damage, standing at the back wall with your chin lifted just slightly too high and a glass of water you weren't drinking. He had his own rooms like that. The hospital waiting area on the 4th floor of St. Francis, where he'd sat for 6 hours while they told him things in measured medical language that took him a long time to fully translate. The kitchen of their old apartment on Decatur Street, where he'd made coffee the morning after and not known what to do with the second cup. His own grief had rooms in it, places inside daily life that were perfectly ordinary until they weren't, until some small trigger flipped a switch and he was suddenly there again, in the specific temperature of the worst year of his life. He understood, in a way he hadn't fully articulated even to himself, that Victoria was navigating a grief of her own, different in structure, different in origin, but the same essential architecture. The life you thought you were going to have turned into the question of what to do with the one you actually had. And she had answered that question, he thought, imperfectly, with considerable cost, in ways that were still working themselves out. But she had answered it. She had built something real. She had kept going. She had stood in that room at the networking event and held herself together through pure force of will. And when a man she didn't know had walked over and said something ordinary about bruschetta, she had responded like a person who still believed in the possibility of being seen. That, more than anything, was what had gotten him. Not the scar, not the story, not the loneliness he'd recognized or the way the room had treated her. The fact that she was still there, still showing up, still lifting her chin just slightly too high and weathering whatever the room decided to do. That took something. He knew, because he'd spent 4 years doing a quieter version of the same thing, choosing every morning to be present in a life that had become significantly harder to be present in. He recognized the effort. He respected it in a way that went past conscious decision and into something more like instinct. The 3:15 bell rang. Kids poured out of the doors. Caleb got out of his truck and stood with the other parents on the sidewalk, hands in his jacket pockets, looking for Lily's braids in the crowd. She spotted him first, which she usually did, and came running, not at full speed, because she was 8 and had recently decided that running at full speed was babyish, but at a brisk walk that was clearly suppressed running. She had her backpack and her lunch bag and the botany mystery tucked under her arm, and she was already talking before she reached him. "Dad, okay, so I have a theory about the fern clue. Let's hear it." "The character thinks the fern was moved recently, right? Because of the root pattern, but I think—" She fell into step beside him. "I think she's wrong about the direction. I think the fern was placed there to cover something, not because it was moved from somewhere else." "You think the detective is wrong?" "I think she's missing something." He opened the truck door for her. "Have you considered a career in quality control?" "What's quality control?" "It's when you look at something someone else made and figure out what's wrong with it." Lily got in the truck and thought about this. "That sounds like a lot of disagreeing with people." "It is." "I might be good at that," she said. He started the engine. "Victoria's coming to dinner on Saturday," he said. "Formal dinner? Big event?" Lily looked at him, the evaluative look. "Is that a date?" "It's a dinner." "Are you going as her person?" He glanced at her. "Her person?" "Like, her person, the one she goes places with." He thought about this, pulling out of the school lot. "I think I'm becoming that," he said. "Yeah." Lily seemed to file this, with the same seriousness she applied to fern forensics and botany mysteries. Then she picked up her book. "Good," she said, and went back to reading. He drove home through the late afternoon light, his daughter reading in the back seat, the city outside the windows going about its ordinary business, and something in his chest was unguarded in a way it hadn't been in a long time. Not wide open, not reckless, but cracked enough to let something in. He didn't push on it, he just drove and let it be what it was, and didn't name it yet. Some things needed a little more time before they could bear the weight of a name. The suit fit within a reasonable margin of error, as promised. Caleb stood in front of the bathroom mirror on Saturday evening, adjusting the collar of a white dress shirt he'd ironed twice, because the first time hadn't been quite right, and looked at himself with the particular critical detachment of a man who doesn't spend much time looking at himself in mirrors. The suit was dark navy, bought 3 years ago for a cousin's wedding, and worn exactly once. It still fit across the shoulders. The trousers were slightly long, but not embarrassingly so. He'd polished his shoes the night before, while Lily supervised and offered commentary. "You look like a dad going to a school thing," she had said. "I am a dad. This is a thing." You look like a dad going to a school thing where you're trying to look like you're not a dad going to a school thing. That's very specific. There's a difference, she'd said, between trying to look like something and actually looking like it. He thought about that now, in the mirror. He wasn't trying to look like a man who belonged at a formal charity benefit dinner in a room full of people who had money and social fluency and the particular ease of people who had never had to think too hard about either. He just looked like what he was, a man who fixed elevators and raised his daughter and had one suit that fit within a reasonable margin of error. There was nothing wrong with that. He had spent enough of his life being underestimated in rooms to have stopped needing the room's approval of how he entered it. He thought about Victoria saying, "I'll be fine" on the phone, and not being sure if she meant the suit or something else entirely. He thought she probably meant something else entirely. "Mrs.?" Kowalski came at 6:30 with a casserole dish and the energy of a woman who had been waiting for this particular occasion for some time. She was 71, small, with silver hair and the directness of a person who had stopped seeing the point of indirection sometime around her 65th birthday. She had been Caleb's neighbor for 6 years, had fed him through the worst of the grief years with a consistency that he hadn't fully appreciated until he was on the other side of it, and had met Lily as a newborn and regarded her with the proprietary affection of someone who had earned honorary grandparent status through sheer proximity and casseroles. "You look good," she told Caleb. "Nervous, but good." "I'm not nervous." She set the casserole on the counter. "You've been pacing since 5:30. I can hear it through the floor." He hadn't realized he'd been pacing. "The building has thin floors." "The building has very thin floors," she agreed, unbothered. "Go, you'll be late." Lily was on the couch with her book and did not look up when he said goodbye. This was a good sign. Lily's social calibration was extremely accurate. She knew when attention was an asset and when it became pressure, and she had apparently decided that the departure required low ceremony. "Have fun," she said to the Fern Forensics. "Thank you, Lil." "Tell Victoria I said hi." "I will." A pause. Then she looked up, just briefly, the evaluative look taking him in. "Dad," she said. "You look fine. You look like yourself. That's better." He stood in the doorway for a second. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." He picked Victoria up at her apartment, which was in a building on Pacific Avenue that had a lobby with marble floors and a doorman who nodded at Caleb with the professional neutrality of a man who had seen everything and formed opinions about none of it. Caleb had texted from the car, and she came down rather than buzzing him up, which he filed without comment, the small unconscious habit of a person who managed entrances and exits carefully, who preferred to control the geography of encounters. She came through the lobby door, and he had a moment, brief, not cinematic, but real, of seeing her before she saw him. She was wearing black, simple, floor-length, nothing that announced itself. Her hair was up, which meant the scar was fully visible, the pale curved line from cheekbone to jaw, and she had made no effort to conceal it. No strategic hair placement, no artful angle. It was simply there, the way it always was, the fact of it. She walked through the lobby with the composed precision she always carried, shoulders straight, chin at that particular angle. Then she came through the door and saw him, and the composure shifted. Not dropped, but softened slightly, in the specific way that happened when she was with him now, that thing he'd noticed over the past weeks. A small release, the door settling into its frame. "Hi," she said. "Hi." He looked at her. "You look really good." She glanced down at herself briefly, the way people do when they're not quite sure how to receive a direct compliment. "It's just black." "It's not just black," he said. "But okay." She looked at him for a moment. "You look like yourself," she said. He almost laughed. "That's what Lily said." Lily is very perceptive. She says hi, by the way. Something moved across Victoria's face, that warm, complicated expression she got when Lily came up. She'd been getting it more often lately, in a way that Caleb had stopped trying to analyze and had started simply noting, the way you note weather, present, recurring, significant in ways that didn't yet have the right language. The dinner was at the Haverford, a venue in the financial district that had the particular quality of spaces designed to impress people who were already impressed by things. High ceilings, understated lighting, white tablecloths that looked ironed by someone whose sole job was ironing tablecloths. The Literacy Coalition benefit drew around 200 people, most of them in some combination of philanthropy, technology, and finance, with the specific social fluency of a crowd that had been to many events exactly like this one. Caleb felt the room the way he always felt rooms. Not anxious, just observant. He cataloged it without meaning to. The power clusters near the bar. The careful seating that put donors adjacent to people who would reinforce their sense of having done something important by being here. The particular performance of generosity that charity events required from everyone in them. He had been in enough buildings that were performing structural soundness while quietly failing in their load-bearing elements to recognize performance when he saw it. Victoria navigated it differently than he'd expected. He had expected the back wall stance, the controlled distance, the chin slightly too high, the strategic blankness she wore in rooms where she wasn't sure what they were going to do with her. And some of that was present. He saw it arrive when a woman near the entrance looked at her and then deliberately redirected her attention with a smoothness that wasn't quite smooth enough to be unintentional. He saw it when a man in a gray suit clocked her from across the room and said something brief to his companion that made both of them glance over. But he also saw something else. In the moments between those moments, in the interactions with the coalition staff who greeted her by name and with genuine warmth, in the way she spoke to a young woman at the registration table who turned out to be a program coordinator for one of the East Side schools. In those moments, Victoria was different. Not performing, just present. The version of herself that came out in wobbly table coffee shops and elementary school reading fairs, comfortable in its own intelligence, engaged in a way that didn't require effort. Ms. Sterling, the program coordinator, her name tag said Priya, had lit up when she saw Victoria. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I come every year," Victoria said, and there was something in her voice that was different from her professional register. Easier, less formal. "The East Side program, we got the renewal confirmation last week." Priya's voice had something in it that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite awe, somewhere in that territory. "The reading scores are up 11%. 11. That's, Ms. Sterling, that's real." "It's the teachers," Victoria said immediately. "And the kids, I just write a check." "You write a very significant check," Priya said, and then seemed to remember that this was not strictly public information and glanced around, and Victoria shook her head slightly. "It's fine." And Priya continued, "The point is, it matters. The kids who were in the program last year are reading above grade level now. Some of them. That's their whole life, potentially." Victoria nodded. She wasn't performing graciousness or doing the thing people do at charity events where they accept credit they've technically declined. She was just listening, really listening, with the quality of attention she always brought to things that mattered to her. Caleb stood slightly to her side and watched. He thought about what Derek had said, too charitable, and about the answer he'd given, and about how much more completely he understood that answer now, standing in this room, watching Victoria Sterling receive information about the actual impact of something she'd built in the margins of a life that had been doing its best to diminish her. This was not a woman who needed his charity. This was not a woman who needed anything from him that could be framed as rescue or repair. She was doing fine. She was, by any measurable standard, doing significantly better than fine. What she needed, what he was only beginning to understand she needed, was someone who saw that clearly. Not the scar, not the story, not the accumulated damage of 6 years of people deciding what she was based on a visible fact about her face. The actual person, the one who funded reading programs and had strong opinions about Marilynne Robinson and made a sound that was almost a laugh when she was genuinely surprised by something. That person had been standing in rooms alone for a long time. He found her hand with his, briefly, without announcement. Just a touch, his fingers against hers for a moment, and then he let go. She looked at him sideways. He tilted his head slightly toward Priya. "Go on." And she turned back and talked to Priya about the program for another 10 minutes, and the ease in her posture was unmistakable. Dinner was assigned seating. They were at a table with 6 others, a couple from a tech company whose name Caleb didn't recognize, a woman who ran a foundation focused on early childhood education, an older man named Gerald who introduced himself as a retired nuisance and turned out to be a former city councilman, and a man named Barton Webb who was somewhere in his mid-50s and had the particular confidence of someone who had been the most important person in every room he'd entered for so long that he'd stopped thinking of it as confidence and started thinking of it as gravity. Barton Webb knew Victoria. Caleb saw it in the way she registered him, the slight controlled adjustment, the chin moving to that angle, and in the way Barton's eyes moved over her in their introductions with the specific quality of a person who has a version of you in their head that they find more interesting than the actual you. "Victoria Sterling," Barton said. "I didn't realize you were still involved with the coalition." "I've been involved every year," she said pleasantly. Right. He turned his wine glass. "I heard about the Pennington contract. Bad business." "It resolved," she said. The pleasantness didn't change. "We found a better fit." "Still," he smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach anywhere near the eyes. "A loss like that shakes things up. How's the team holding up?" "The team is excellent," she said. "Thank you for asking." Caleb watched this exchange with the careful attention he brought to systems under stress. He could see exactly what Barton was doing, the particular social maneuver of a person who uses the language of concern to deliver a series of small diminishments, each individually deniable, collectively designed to establish a hierarchy. He'd seen it in buildings, the property manager who asked questions about the repair timeline in a tone that implied the answers were going to be inadequate. The client who wanted a walkthrough before the work was done, specifically so they could find something to criticize. He also watched Victoria handle it, and she handled it with a precision that was genuinely impressive, giving nothing, conceding nothing, returning every diminishment with a flat politeness that was its own form of refusal. "And what do you do?" Barton asked, turning to Caleb with the loosely curious air of someone who has just remembered there's another person at the table. "I repair elevators," Caleb said. A brief pause. Barton's expression arranged itself into something that was technically a smile. "Interesting," he said, in the tone that meant the opposite. "It is," Caleb said with complete sincerity. "The hydraulic systems in buildings from the 60s and 70s are genuinely fascinating. The engineering constraints they were working under, the solutions they came up with. There's a lot of ingenuity in it." Barton looked at him for a moment. The woman from the Education Foundation, her name was Diane, leaned forward slightly with the expression of someone who has found the evening unexpectedly interesting. "My office building has an elevator that takes about 45 seconds to travel 3 floors, Diane said. "Is that normal?" "Depends on the system," Caleb said. "What year was the building built?" 1958, I think. Drum drive, probably. Older cable systems have a lower approach speed as a safety feature. The machine is reading the floor level mechanically rather than electronically, so it needs the extra time to level accurately. Completely normal, not dangerous, just slow." "I've always wondered," Diane said. "I assumed it was just old." "Old and slow are not the same thing as failing," Caleb said. "Sometimes old just means the system was designed before people decided everything had to be fast." Gerald, the retired nuisance, laughed at that, a genuine laugh, large and unself-conscious. "I like this man," he said to the table in general. Victoria, beside him, said nothing, but under the table he felt her knee press briefly against his. Not a romantic gesture exactly, more like someone silently handing you a note that said, "That was good." He pressed back, equally briefly, and the dinner went on. What happened next happened between the main course and dessert, and it happened because of Barton Webb and a glass of wine and the particular miscalculation that overconfident people sometimes make when they've been getting away with something for so long they've forgotten it's a miscalculation. Barton had been talking to the tech couple for most of the main course, and Caleb had been talking to Gerald about a city infrastructure project from the 80s that Gerald apparently had strong opinions about, and Victoria had been in a conversation with Diane about early literacy curriculum design. Normal dinner geography. Everything dispersed and ambient. And then there was a shift in the conversation's gravity, one of those invisible currents that moves through rooms, and suddenly Barton was addressing the table more broadly, and the topic was leadership, and he was saying something about the coalition and the decisions they'd made in the past year about fund allocation, and he mentioned Victoria's company without quite looking at her. "The consulting model works for certain scales," he said, in the tone of someone making an observation. "But for the coalition to really grow, you need infrastructure that can scale with it. Smaller operations have their value, of course, but there's a point where you need more robust support." The table was quiet for a moment. The tech couple nodded vaguely. Gerald was watching Barton with the expression of a man who has been in enough rooms with enough Bartons to know exactly what was happening. Caleb watched Victoria. She set down her fork. She picked up her water glass, took a measured sip, and set it down again. He had seen her do this exact sequence before, at the networking event at the back wall, when the room was deciding what to do with her presence. The reset. The deliberate pause before the chin went up. She didn't need him to say anything. He knew that. She was going to handle it the way she always handled it, with the flat pleasantness and the concession of nothing and the precision of a person who had been doing this for 6 years and was very, very good at it. But there was something about watching her do it, watching her have to do it, again, in yet another room, that moved in him like something physical. "The coalition's fund allocation decisions from this year," Caleb said conversationally, "led to an 11% improvement in reading scores in the East Side programs. I heard that from one of the coordinators tonight." Barton looked at him. "That's the kind of result you get," Caleb continued, with the same conversational ease, "when the people making decisions actually understand what the programs need at the ground level, rather than at the scale level." He looked at Barton with complete pleasantness. "Infrastructure that scales but doesn't understand what it's scaling tends to scale the wrong things." The table was quiet. Gerald made a very small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Barton's expression rearranged itself through several configurations before settling on something neutral. "Of course," he said. "Results are what matter." "They are," Caleb agreed. The conversation redistributed itself, the way conversation does after a moment of tension, moving to other topics with the collective relief of people who have witnessed something and would like to talk about literally anything else. Diane asked Victoria about the curriculum conversation she'd been having earlier, and Gerald asked Caleb about the infrastructure project again, and the tech couple fell into a private exchange, and Barton Webb became very interested in his dessert menu. Under the table, Victoria's hand found his. Not the brief press of a knee this time. Her fingers closed around his firmly and stayed there. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. They sat like that through dessert, his hand in hers, while the table talked around them, and outside the high windows of the Haverford the city went on with its nighttime business, indifferent and continuous and full of rooms where people were deciding what other people were allowed to be. They left before the formal program ended. Victoria knew people who would want to catch her on the way out, she said, and she'd rather leave while the room's attention was elsewhere. He understood this. He held her coat while she put it on, in the lobby, and she turned around and looked at him with an expression that was not the carefully composed public face and was not the easy version that came out over coffee tables and botany mysteries. It was something underneath both of those, something that had been working its way to the surface for weeks and had tonight run out of reasons to stay submerged. "What you said to Barton," she started. "It was true," he said. "I know it was true. That's not—" She stopped, started again. "I've been in rooms with men like that my entire career, and I've gotten very good at handling them in a particular way. The way that doesn't escalate, that doesn't give them anything to push back on, that just manages. She looked at him, and tonight I was about to do exactly that. Again. You would have handled it. I know I would have. A pause. But you didn't let me have to. He wasn't sure what to say to that. He thought about what he'd said to Derek. I'm not interested in her because of how people treat her. And that was true. It was still true. But he was discovering, not capable of sitting in a room and watching people treat her that way without something in him responding to it. Not protectively, exactly. She didn't need his protection. More like the way you respond when you see someone good being misread. The corrective instinct. The need to put the right information into the room. I don't know if that was the right call, he said honestly. I don't want to. I'm not trying to fight your battles. You don't need that. No, she said. I don't. She was quiet for a moment. But there's a difference between someone fighting your battles and someone just being on your side, in the room, visibly. He looked at her. I haven't had that in a long time, she said. She said it with the same flat precision she used for difficult truths, not performing vulnerability, just stating a fact. I forgot what it felt like. They stood in the lobby of the Haverford, coats on, the evening winding down behind them. The doorman was being pointedly unobservant at his station. Victoria, Caleb said. What? I'm on your side. He said it simply, the way he said things he meant. Not built up, not decorated. That's not going to be a complicated thing. I'm just on your side. She looked at him for a long moment. Her expression moved through something he watched happen in real time. The guard checking whether the statement was what it appeared to be. The careful internal assessment, and then, slowly, the thing he'd seen happen at a reading fair and a coffee shop and in a parking lot with a botany mystery. The release. The door settling. Okay, she said, and then, very quietly, I believe you. They walked out into the night air, which was cold and clear, the city wet from a rain that had passed while they were inside. Victoria pulled her coat closer. Their footsteps on the pavement were the only sound for a moment. Can I tell you something? She said when they reached the car. Yeah. I almost didn't come tonight. She was looking at the street, not at him. Not the dinner. I always come to the dinner. I almost called you last week and said I'd made a mistake asking you, that it was going to be complicated and you'd have to deal with, she gestured slightly, all of this. The room deciding things, the Barton Webbs, the way it follows me. I almost decided it wasn't fair to put that on someone. He leaned against the car. What changed your mind? She looked at him then. Lily said hi to me in a text, through you. A pause. She said, you told her I was coming, and she said to tell me she'd been thinking about the fern clue, and she thought I might have a theory. He stared at her. She texted that to me 3 days ago. You mentioned it in passing. It was a very passing mention. She looked down at her hands. But I thought about an 8-year-old who reads botany mysteries and thinks a woman she's met once might have a theory about a forensic fern, and I thought, she stopped. I thought I want to be in a life that has that in it, even if the rest of it is another pause. Even if it's complicated. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He thought about Lily saying good when he'd told her he'd gotten Victoria's number. He thought about 4 years of shrinking coordinates, apartment, work, school, and a daughter with her mother's eyes who had said, you never go anywhere, and been exactly right. He thought about standing at the back of a room watching a woman hold herself together and feeling something shift in his understanding of what he still had the capacity to feel. It's going to be complicated, he said. I have a kid in a one-suit wardrobe and a career that makes people at benefit dinners say interesting in that specific tone. I have a facial scar in a company and 6 years of people deciding I'm a cautionary tale. So we're both complicated. We're both complicated, she agreed. He opened the car door. She got in. He walked around to the driver's side and got in too, and started the engine, and the heater came on with the mechanical reliability of a thing that had been properly maintained. For the record, he said, pulling out of the parking spot, the interesting tone people use doesn't bother me. I know it doesn't, she said. That's one of the things about you. What are the other things? She looked out the window at the passing city. He could see her faint reflection in the glass, the slight curve at the corner of her mouth that was almost a smile and then became one, quietly, when she thought he wasn't watching. I'll tell you, she said, when I've made the full list. He drove. The city moved past them, lit and alive and completely unaware of any of it. A man in a navy suit that fit within a reasonable margin of error, a woman in a black dress with her coat pulled around her, and between them something that had been growing in the careful, unglamorous way that real things grow, without announcement, without perfection, without any guarantee except the fact of two people choosing to keep showing up. That was not nothing. In Caleb's experience, that was almost everything. He dropped her at Pacific Avenue. She got out and then paused with her hand on the door. Next Saturday, she said. Lily mentioned she wants to go to the Natural History Museum, the botany exhibit. He looked at her. Did she? She texted me. A pause. We've been texting. I should have mentioned that. When did you start? 3 days after the reading fair. She had the expression of someone braced for a reaction that could go either way. She asked a very specific question about whether epiphytic orchids could be used as forensic evidence. I couldn't not answer it. He sat with this for a moment, the image of his 8-year-old daughter conducting an independent correspondence with Victoria Sterling about forensic botany, and felt something enormous and unwieldy moving around in his chest, something he didn't have the right word for yet and was going to need more time with. Saturday, so, he said. Natural History Museum. If that's okay? Victoria, he said. Of course it's okay. She nodded, closed the door. He watched her walk through the lobby, past the marble floors and the impassive doorman, and disappear into the elevator. He sat there for a moment, engine running, the city quiet around him at 11:30 on a Saturday night. Then he pulled his phone out and opened his texts with Lily. Scrolled up. Found it. 3 days after the reading fair, a message he'd read quickly and not thought much about. Dad, can I text Victoria a question about science? It's important. He'd written back sure without looking up from whatever he'd been doing. He scrolled further. There were 17 messages between them. Forensic botany. Epiphytic orchids. A tangent about whether forensic science was more like meteorology or botany, which had apparently been ongoing for 2 weeks. A message from Lily that said, I think you'd be good at solving crimes. And Victoria's reply, I think I'd be too impatient. I prefer preventing problems to solving them after the fact. And Lily's response, that's just being a mechanic. He read that last exchange twice. His daughter had called Victoria Sterling a mechanic, and Victoria had replied, I suppose it is. Your dad would agree. He put the phone down. He sat in the quiet car for another moment, and then he drove home. And the whole way back through the late-night streets, he carried the particular sensation of a man who has been surviving for a long time and has just, without quite realizing it, started doing something else. Mrs. Kowalski was asleep on the couch when he got in, a small, silver-haired figure under one of Lily's spare blankets, the television on low. He turned it off, checked on Lily, who was in bed with the botany mystery face down on her chest, one lamp still on. He turned the lamp off, stood in the doorway for a second. She stirred. Dad? Go back to sleep. How was it? Good, he said. Really good, actually. A pause. Did you tell her I said hi? She already knew. Apparently you've been texting about forensic orchids. Lily was quiet for long enough that he thought she'd gone back to sleep. Then, I was going to tell you. I know. She's really smart, Dad. I know that too. And she texts back fast. Most adults don't text back fast. Most adults have more going on. She has more going on than any adult I know, Lily said, with the authority of someone who had been conducting an independent assessment. But she texts back fast. That means something. He thought about what it meant. He thought about 17 text messages about forensic botany, and an 8-year-old who texted that's just being a mechanic, and a woman who had replied with something that connected back to him. He thought about the Natural History Museum and the botany exhibit, and a Saturday that was going to be a specific kind of ordinary that was not ordinary at all. Yeah, he said from the doorway. It means something. Lily settled back into her pillow. He waited until her breathing slowed and evened out, and then he went to the kitchen and stood there in the quiet apartment and thought about nothing in particular for a while, just stood there in his navy suit and let the evening be what it had been. Outside, the city was doing its late-night things. Traffic on the main roads, the distant sound of something that might have been music, the low hum of a place that never fully went quiet. Normal sounds, ordinary city, the same apartment he'd lived in for 6 years, the same kitchen, the same worn place on the linoleum near the sink. Everything exactly the same as it had been that morning. And underneath that sameness, something shifted. Something that didn't need a name yet, but was real, and was his, and was no longer just surviving. The Natural History Museum on a Saturday turned out to be exactly what Caleb should have predicted, and somehow hadn't. Lily in full research mode, Victoria keeping pace without visible effort, and himself functioning primarily as the person who carried the map and bought the sandwiches from the cafe on the ground floor. The botany exhibit was on the 3rd level, past the geology hall, and through a corridor lined with pressed plant specimens from the 19th century that Lily stopped to examine with an intensity that suggested she was considering a career change from detective scientist to museum curator. Victoria stood beside her and read the placard for a specimen labeled Cattleya labiata, and said something quiet that made Lily's head snap up with the expression she got when a question had just multiplied into 6 more questions. Caleb stood slightly back and ate his sandwich and watched the two of them. He had been watching them together for 3 weeks now, at the museum, at his apartment on 2 separate Sunday evenings when Victoria had come for dinner and stayed for 2 hours after Lily's bedtime talking with him at the kitchen table, at Lily's school pickup on a Thursday when Victoria had been nearby for a client meeting and had stopped in for 20 minutes and ended up in a 20-minute conversation with Lily's teacher about the literacy program at the school that the teacher hadn't known was funded by Victoria's company. 3 weeks of this particular new geography, his daughter, and this woman and himself moving through ordinary spaces together. And he still hadn't found the right way to hold it. Not because it was uncomfortable, because it wasn't, and that itself required adjustment, the ease of it. The way Lily had absorbed Victoria into her life with the same matter-of-fact thoroughness she applied to everything she decided was important. The way Victoria arrived at his door, already knowing what Lily was currently reading and having thoughts about it. The way his apartment, which had been a quiet and slightly hollow place for 4 years, had started to feel different on the evenings she was in it. Not warmer exactly, because that was too simple a word. More inhabited, maybe. More like what it had been when there were 2 adults in it who talked to each other after the kid went to bed. He had told himself, very deliberately, not to move faster than things needed to move. He had a daughter. He had 4 years of living carefully. He had learned, the hard way, that the structures people built in the absence of something real could become as load-bearing as the thing itself, and dismantling them required care. But the structures were shifting. He could feel it in the way he drove home from work thinking about what she'd said that morning in a text, in the way he noticed now that the apartment was quieter on the evenings she wasn't in it. "Dad," Lily appeared at his elbow. "Victoria says epiphytic orchids can actually be used as forensic evidence in some cases because of spore patterns. That's exactly what I thought." "I know. You told me." "I know I told you, but now there's confirmation." Lily held up her notebook. She had started bringing a notebook to the museum, a development that Caleb was choosing to encourage. "I'm updating my theory." Victoria appeared behind her, reading a different placard. "There's a case from 1994 in the Pacific Northwest," she said, "where pollen analysis helped narrow a search radius. It's not common forensic methodology, but it's documented." "Do you know about it because of your company?" Lily asked. "I know about it because I read too much." "That's not a thing," Lily said. "Reading too much isn't a thing." "Your father says it is." "Dad." Lily turned to him with the expression, "Back me up." "I never said reading too much isn't a thing," Caleb said. "I said reading at 2 in the morning when you have school is a thing." "That's a different point." "It's an important point." Victoria was looking at the placard with the particular expression she got when she was suppressing something, the slight compression at the corners of her eyes, the careful neutral mouth. He'd become fluent in this expression over the past weeks. It meant she found something genuinely funny and was deciding whether the moment warranted showing it. He gave her a look that said, "Go ahead." The corner of her mouth moved. Not the almost smile. The real one, quick and slightly rueful and entirely hers. She looked back at the placard. Lily was already moving to the next specimen. He fell into step with Victoria, and they followed his daughter through the botany exhibit, and the afternoon had the quality of something he was going to remember, not because anything remarkable happened in it, but because of the specific texture of it. His daughter's notebook filling with increasingly elaborate theories, Victoria's voice low and even as she answered questions, the old building around them with its high ceilings, and the particular institutional smell of places dedicated to knowing things. Normal, he thought. That's the word. It felt normal. And normal, after 4 years of a life that had been stripped down to its essential load-bearing elements and nothing more, felt like a thing worth paying attention to. The complications arrived, as they tend to, without scheduling. The first one came from his sister. Renee Parker lived in Sacramento and had the family trait of directness dialed up to a degree that could, depending on the circumstance, be either her greatest quality or a significant liability. She called on a Tuesday evening, which was their usual call schedule, and he told her, because he'd been going to tell her, had been meaning to for 2 weeks, that he'd been seeing someone. There was a pause on the line. "Someone," Renee said. "A woman. Her name is Victoria. She runs a company." Another pause. "How long?" "About 2 months." 2 months, and this is the first I'm hearing about it. I wasn't sure what it was at first. And now?" He thought about how to answer that. "Now I'm sure enough to mention it." Renee was quiet for a moment. He could hear her doing the calculation that siblings do, the particular mental math of a person weighing what they want to say against what they should say, and arriving at something in the middle. "Caleb," she said carefully, "it's been 4 years. I know how long it's been. I'm not saying I'm glad. I am. I just want to make sure you're—" She stopped. "Are you actually ready for this? Because Lily's in it now. You said she knows her. And if this doesn't—" "Renee, I'm just asking. I know what you're asking." He walked to the window of the apartment, looked out at the street below. "I was ready when I was ready. I can't retroactively schedule it." "I know." A breath. "Tell me about her." He told her. The networking event, the reading fair, the benefit dinner, the literacy programs, the text chain about forensic botany. He told her about Marcus, briefly, the outline of it, and about the scar, because Renee would find out, and he'd rather she found out from him. The pause after the scar was a beat longer than the others. "That doesn't matter to you," Renee said. "It wasn't a question." "No." "Okay." Another pause. Good." And he could hear something settle in her, the particular sound of a protective older sister locating the right position to stand in. "When do I meet her?" "When it's time." That's a non-answer. It's the honest answer. She accepted this. They talked for another 20 minutes about other things, and when he hung up, he stood at the window for a moment and thought about ready. Renee's question. "Are you actually ready for this?" He didn't know how to answer it, not fully. He had spent 4 years being the version of himself that grief had made, capable, present, functional, loving to his daughter, good at his work. That version was real. It wasn't a shell or a coping mechanism. It was who he had become, but who he'd been before grief. The version that had walked through life with Sarah as a fixed coordinate, that had made plans that extended further than the next school week, that had believed in the ordinary continuity of a future. That version had gone somewhere, and he hadn't been sure it still existed until about 2 months ago, when he'd stood in a parking lot in a wobbly table coffee shop in a benefit dinner and felt it coming back. Not all at once, not completely, but coming. He thought Renee was right to ask. He also thought there was a version of readiness that you didn't achieve in advance, that some things you were only ready for in the doing of them. The second complication came from his neighbor across the hall. Paul Greer was 63, a retired shipping logistics manager, and had opinions about most things that he shared freely and without invitation. He had been Caleb's neighbor for 3 years, and their relationship was the specific friendship of two people who run into each other in hallways regularly enough to have developed shorthand, but not close enough to have been inside each other's apartments more than twice. Paul was harmless. Paul was also, Caleb was discovering, someone who had apparently formed views about Victoria without knowing her. "The woman who's been coming around," Paul said, appearing in the hallway on a Wednesday morning when Caleb was taking out trash. "The one with the gesture, different version of the same gesture Derek had made months ago." "How long has that been going on?" "A couple months," Caleb said. Paul looked at the elevator doors with the air of a man gathering words. "You know, Caleb, I think you're a good man, good father, good neighbor. You've been on your own a while. I want to make sure you're not..." "Not what, Paul?" "Taking on something that's going to be..." He searched. "Complicated." Caleb looked at him for a moment. He was aware of the particular patience this required. The same patience he'd needed with Derek, the same he'd spent managing at the benefit dinner, the same Victoria navigated every time she entered a room, the slow accumulation of other people's assumptions about what her presence in his life would cost him. "Her name is Victoria," Caleb said. "She's a CEO. She's smart. She's kind to my daughter in a way that Lily didn't ask for and didn't get from very many people after Sarah died." He held Paul's gaze. "The complicated thing you're worried about is that she has a scar on her face." Paul had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm not trying to..." "I know," Caleb said, "but that's what it is." He picked up the trash bag. "Victoria has more going on than most people I've met. The scar is the least interesting thing about her. I'd appreciate it if you treated it that way, too." Paul was quiet for a moment. Then, "Fair enough," he said, with the tone of a man who has been corrected and knows it. "Fair enough, Caleb." It was not a dramatic exchange. It didn't need to be. It was a small, ordinary moment of saying a clear thing clearly, and it cost Caleb exactly nothing except a minute in a hallway. He told Victoria about it that evening, on the phone. There was a silence. "You didn't have to say anything to him," she said. "I know. You could have just let it go. People let it go." "I don't have a lot of patience left over for that," he said. He was using his own words from 2 months ago, and she recognized them. He could hear it in the pause. "For social optics," she said. "Right." Another silence, longer. When she spoke again, her voice was slightly different, quieter, with that quality it had in the moments when the careful composure wasn't the primary thing. "Does it happen a lot? People saying things to you about..." "Some," he said honestly. "Not constantly, but some." "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." "Caleb, Victoria." He sat down on the couch. "I want to be clear about something. The things people say to me about you, they're not a cost I'm absorbing. They're just people being wrong about something, and I'm telling them they're wrong. And then we're done. It's not a sacrifice. It's not me being noble. It's just the obvious thing to say when someone says something incorrect." She was quiet for long enough that he thought he'd lost her to one of her silences. The ones where she went somewhere private and he'd learned to wait. "Most people don't experience it that way," she said finally. "Most people," he said, "aren't being honest about what the situation actually requires." She made the sound, the one that wasn't quite a laugh. He had become very fond of that sound. "I have a question," he said. "Okay." "Have you told anyone about me? Anyone in your life?" A pause. "My assistant knows. She's seen the texts." "That's not what I mean." "I know it's not." Another pause. My social world is not large, Caleb. That's not a complaint, it's just accurate. After Marcus, after the..." She stopped, started again. "I lost a lot of people, and I rebuilt a life that was mine, that worked, that didn't depend on other people's availability. Which is a reasonable adaptation, but also means a breath. There isn't a Renee. There isn't a Derek. There's my assistant Joanna, who is the closest thing I have to a friend who isn't also a colleague. And yes, she knows about you." "What does she say?" "She says it's about time and also that she wants a full report." "That sounds like a reasonable response." "She's extremely reasonable." A pause. "She also said..." She said it was good that Lily likes me. She said that was the important thing. It is the important thing, Caleb said. I know. And then quietly, I keep waiting for something to make it complicated. For Lily to decide she's not okay with it. For the dynamic to shift. For her to miss her mother and resent me for being in the space. He thought about this carefully before answering, because it deserved care. She misses her mother constantly, he said. That's not going away. It's not something to fix. He paused. But Lily doesn't experience the world in either or. She's 8. She's lost something permanent and she knows it. And she's a person who makes room. She always has been. He looked at the ceiling. She's not attaching to you instead of Sarah. She's just making room. That's who she is. A long silence on the line. You make it sound simple, Victoria said. It's not simple, but it's real. Yes, she said, it is. The third complication was the one he hadn't seen coming, which was, in retrospect, how complications usually worked. It was a Sunday afternoon, 6 weeks into whatever they had stopped needing to call something undefined and started simply living. Victoria had been at the apartment for the afternoon, Charset. They'd made dinner, the 3 of them, with varying levels of contribution. Caleb had handled the actual cooking, Lily had supervised with specific opinions about seasoning, and Victoria had been assigned the task of making the salad and had executed it with the methodical precision of someone who approached all tasks as problems to be solved correctly. The salad had been extremely good. Lily had said so 3 times. After dinner, after Lily had gone to bed, reluctantly, with extended negotiations about whether the chapter she was on counted as a stopping point, Caleb and Victoria were in the kitchen doing dishes, and the quiet was the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need to be filled. And then Victoria said, I saw Marcus last week. He turned off the water. He was at a conference, infrastructure and technology. It wasn't... She set down the dish she was drying. I didn't know he'd be there. We were in the same room for about 20 minutes. We didn't speak. Caleb was quiet, waiting. He looked the same, she said. That was the thing. I'd built this idea over 6 years that I would see him eventually and understand something, that it would clarify or resolve or, I don't know, mean something. She was looking at the dish in her hand, and he was just there, in the room, looking the same. And I thought about the note he left and the hospital room and the version of myself that had believed in the life we were building. She put the dish down on the counter, and I felt nothing. And then I felt something, but it wasn't what I expected. What was it? Caleb asked. She looked at him. I felt angry. Not at him, specifically, at the years, at all the time I spent managing the damage of someone else's decision, all the rooms I've walked into holding myself together, all the people who... She stopped. I've been carrying that for 6 years, and I didn't realize how much of it I was still carrying until I saw his face and felt how different things are now. A pause. How different I am. Different how? She looked at him steadily. I'm less afraid of rooms, she said. I've been in rooms with you, and I'm less afraid of them. He didn't say anything for a moment. He turned back to the sink, turned the water on again, and finished the glass he'd been washing, set it on the rack. And that made you angry, he said. Yes, because... She was working something out, he could hear it. Because it should have happened before. I should have been... She stopped. That's not a rational thought. You can't schedule when people arrive in your life. No, he said. You can't. But I wasted time being less than I was capable of being, she said. That's what I felt, in that room. That Marcus had cost me time I can't have back. And I was angry. You're allowed to be angry, he said. I know I am. A pause. I'm telling you because... She seemed to find the end of the sentence slightly hard to locate. Because you should know that I saw him, that it moved things around, that I came here tonight with that in me, and you should know it's there. He turned around and looked at her. She was standing with her arms crossed slightly, not defensively, but in the way she sometimes stood when she was doing the internal accounting that was always going on underneath the surface of her. That careful, ongoing assessment of what she had and what she owed and what was true. "Thank you for telling me," he said. You don't want to know what he looked like, what the room was like, what I thought about." "If you want to tell me," he said. "But I don't need it." She looked at him. "Most people would want the details." "I'm not interested in Marcus," he said. "I'm interested in you, and what you just told me is the thing about you that matters. Not him." He leaned against the counter. "You went into a room that had every reason to undo you, and instead of being undone, you felt the difference between who you were and who you are. That's not loss. That's what 6 years of doing the work looks like." She looked at him for a long moment, her arms uncrossed. The thing he'd learned to recognize, the door settling into its frame, happened slowly, almost deliberately, like she was choosing to let it happen rather than having it happen to her. "I'm not good at this," she said. "Being in something, with someone. I've been alone for long enough that I have habits, ways of managing. I close things off. I go quiet when I should talk. I process in private and show up later with conclusions, but not the process." "I know," he said. "That bothers you." "It doesn't bother me. It's just how you are." He paused. "I'm not great at this either. I spent 4 years making sure nothing got in. I got very good at the routine that kept everything manageable. I don't always know when to stop managing and start." He searched, being present without the safety distance. She was quiet for a moment. "We're both bad at it." "We're both working on it," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. Something he'd been watching shift over weeks and months, very gradually, layer by layer, the way ice doesn't melt dramatically, but just becomes, at some point you can't precisely identify, water. "I don't want to waste any more time," she said. It wasn't a declaration. It was a quiet, factual statement, the way she delivered the truths she meant most. "I spent 6 years protecting myself from things that turned out to be less dangerous than the protection itself. And I'm tired of it. I want—" She stopped, steadied. "I want what we have. I want this apartment and these dinners and Lily's theories about forensic ferns. I want to be somewhere that feels like something, and I want to stop waiting to see if it's going to be taken away." Caleb was quiet for a moment. He looked at this woman in his kitchen, standing in the light from above the sink, who had walked through 6 years of damage and come out the other side still capable of wanting things, still capable of standing in front of someone and saying the honest thing even when it cost something to say it. "It's not going to be taken away," he said. "You can't promise that." "No," he agreed. "I can't promise anything about what happens." He straightened up from the counter. "I can tell you what I know. I know I'm not going anywhere. I know Lily is not going anywhere. I know that what this is—" He gestured slightly at the space between them, at the kitchen and the apartment and everything the evening contained. "This is the most real thing I've been part of in 4 years. And I'm not managing it. I'm in it." A pause. "So are you." She stood very still. "Yeah," she said, finally, very quietly. "I am." He crossed the kitchen. He took her face in his hands, both of them, gently, the way you handle something you're being careful with, and kissed her. It was not the first time, technically. There had been a moment outside his truck 2 weeks ago, brief and slightly sideways, the kind of thing that lands wrong because the angle was off, and both of them were somewhere between nervous and surprised. This was not like that. This was deliberate, present. Both of them showing up to the same moment at the same time, which was harder than it sounded and more valuable than almost anything else he could name. When he pulled back, she was looking at him with that unguarded expression, the one he'd seen in flashes over months, that lived underneath all the careful architecture. The real face. The one she'd had before 6 years of rooms had required her to build something more defensive over the top of it. "Okay," she said, which was not a romantic thing to say and was also exactly right. "Okay," he agreed. She stayed for another hour. They sat in the living room with the television on at low volume, not really watching it, and talked about nothing consequential. A problem she was having with a vendor, something funny Lily had said in one of their texts about whether mushrooms counted as plants for forensic purposes. a building Caleb had been working in that week, where the elevator shaft had revealed what appeared to be a time capsule from 1987. Normal things. Ordinary things. The ordinary things that accumulate, over time, into what a life together actually is. At the door, she put on her coat and picked up her bag, and he stood in the doorway the way he always did when she left. Not urgently, not trying to extend it, just present in the leaving the way he'd learned to be present in everything else. "Saturday?" she said. "Saturday," he confirmed. There was no event, no museum, no occasion. Just Saturday, just showing up. She nodded, walked down the hall. He watched her go, the way her coat moved, the way she walked with that composed precision that was hers even when she was relaxed, even when the door was settled into its frame and the composure was just the natural shape of her rather than something maintained under pressure. She didn't look back. She never did. Not theatrically, not pointedly. She just went. And he went back inside and stood in his apartment, which was quieter now, and felt the quality of that quiet. Not the hollow quiet of the years before, not the absence of something, just the quiet of a night that had contained something real and was now settling into itself, the way good things settle, without fanfare, without ceremony, with just the particular weight of something that has earned its own gravity. Lily, from behind her bedroom door, said, "Dad." He walked down the hall, pushed the door open. She was sitting up in bed with the botany mystery. "You were supposed to be asleep an hour ago," he said. "I know." She held up the book. "It got good." "It's always good. That's not an argument." "The fern clue resolved," she said. "I was right about the direction." He leaned against the doorframe. "Were you?" "Completely right. The fern was placed, not displaced. The forensic conclusion changes everything." She said this with enormous satisfaction. "Victoria's going to be very pleased." "You're going to text her at 11 p.m. about a forensic fern?" "I'm going to text her in the morning," Lily said with dignity. "I have some self-control." He took the book, turned off the lamp. She didn't argue, which meant she was actually tired and had simply been waiting for the natural conclusion of events. "Is she okay?" Lily asked from the dark. "Victoria." He paused. "Yeah, she's okay. She seemed okay at dinner, but sometimes she gets quiet in a way that's different from regular quiet." He stood there for a moment. His 8-year-old daughter, who had her mother's eyes and apparently her mother's ability to see what was happening in a room before anyone said anything about it. "She's working some things out," he said. "Same as all of us." "Okay," Lily said, and then, "Dad, I'm glad she comes here." He stood in the doorway. "Me too," he said. He pulled the door mostly closed and walked back down the hall and sat in the living room in the quiet apartment and thought about the way his life had looked a year ago from the inside. The reliable coordinates, the careful routine, the managed absence of anything that could hurt him, and about what it looked like now. It was messier, more unpredictable. There were complications he hadn't budgeted for, and conversations he was still learning how to have, and a woman who went quiet in ways that were different from regular quiet, and a daughter who noticed, and a grief that was still there, somewhere in the structure, but was no longer the main load-bearing element. It was, by any reasonable accounting, more difficult. It was also, by the same accounting, more like a life. He sat with that for a while. Then he turned off the lights, one by one, moving through the apartment that felt inhabited now in a way it hadn't for years. He stopped at the window in the kitchen, the one that looked out over the street, the same one he'd looked out of 100 times in the hollow years, watching the city do its indifferent thing. It was still doing its indifferent thing, the streetlights, the passing cars, the ordinary ongoing machinery of a city at night. Nothing had changed out there. In here, everything had. He turned off the last light and went to bed, and for the first time in a long time, he fell asleep without effort, without the careful management of thoughts, without the deliberate focusing on routine and logistics that had served as his method for years. He just lay down in the dark and felt the day settle around him, and slept the uncomplicated sleep of a man who had, without quite deciding to, stopped holding himself at a distance from his own life. Winter came to the city the way it always did. Not dramatically, not with a single hard freeze that announced itself, but gradually, the temperature dropping a few degrees at a time, until one morning you went outside and realized that the season had changed while you weren't paying attention. Caleb noticed it on a Tuesday in late November, standing on the roof access of a building in the Richmond district where he'd been called to inspect a traction elevator that had been throwing error codes since the previous Friday. The city spread out below him in the early morning cold, gray, and close, the bay a flat dark line in the distance. He stood up there for longer than the job required, hands in his jacket pockets, thinking about nothing specific and everything at once. It had been nearly a year. He turned the number over in his head, not as a milestone, not with any particular ceremony, just as a fact that had a certain weight to it. Nearly a year since a Thursday evening in October when he'd sat in a truck in a parking lot and almost gone home to reheated pasta. Nearly a year of Saturdays and coffee shops and benefit dinners and forensic botany and late evenings in a kitchen that had stopped feeling hollow. Nearly a year of learning, slowly and imperfectly and without any clean narrative arc, how to be a person again rather than a system of managed distances. The elevator job took most of the morning. The error codes turned out to be a faulty landing sensor on the third floor, a small thing, as the actual problem so often was once you got into the work. He replaced the sensor, ran the diagnostic sequence twice, rode the car up and down 6 times to confirm the repair. The building superintendent, a woman named Carol who had been calling him twice a day since Friday with escalating concern, stood in the lobby and watched him come down in the car with an expression of profound relief. "I cannot tell you," she said, "how many complaints I've had." "It's fixed," he said. The sensor was misreading the floor level. The car was stopping about 2 inches above the threshold on 3. 2 inches doesn't sound like much. It's enough to trip someone, especially elderly residents. Carol nodded vigorously. She had the energy of a woman who had been holding a problem together through force of personality for 4 days and was now releasing it. "You're a lifesaver," she said. "I fix elevators," he said, which was what he always said. He drove back toward the shop through the mid-morning traffic, the radio on low, and thought about what he was going to do that evening. Victoria had a board meeting that was running late. She'd texted at 8 a.m. to warn him, which was something she'd started doing over the past months. The small navigational communications of 2 people whose schedules had become, gradually and without formal announcement, things that intersected enough to require coordination. He told her he and Lily would eat without her. She'd said she'd come by after, if it wasn't too late. He'd said it was never too late, which was a thing he'd meant, and which had landed with more weight than he'd planned, judging by the pause before her reply of, "Okay." These were the things you didn't anticipate, he thought. Not the large moments. He'd braced himself at various points over the past year for large moments, for things that would require decisions. What he hadn't anticipated was the accumulation of small things, the coordination, the way his Thursday evenings had reorganized themselves around the possibility of her. The way Lily had started setting 3 places at the table without being asked, approximately 6 weeks ago, and neither of them had commented on it. The way his apartment had stopped being the place where he waited out the hours between obligations and had become, again, something he was glad to come home to. He stopped at the grocery store on the way back. He bought the ingredients for the pasta dish Lily had been requesting for 2 weeks. And while he was in the produce section, he picked up the specific type of apple that Victoria preferred. She was precise about apples, had opinions he'd found initially faintly absurd, and now simply accommodating, and put it in the basket without thinking about it. He was in the checkout line before he realized what he'd done, buying groceries for a person without being asked, without checking, just knowing. He thought about that for the rest of the drive home. Lily was at school. The apartment was quiet in the afternoon way, winter light coming through the kitchen window at a low angle. He put the groceries away, changed out of his work clothes, sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the paperwork he'd been avoiding for a week. He worked for an hour, and then he stopped working, and he sat in the quiet apartment with the low winter light, and he thought about the ring. He'd been thinking about the ring for 6 weeks. Not continuously, not in the obsessive way that decisions sometimes become when you're afraid of them. More like the way you think about a thing that's already decided but that you haven't yet fully acknowledged to yourself, circling it, returning to it, finding it still there each time. The same conclusion every time. Quiet and certain in the way of things that are simply true. He'd been to the jewelry store on Geary Street 3 weeks ago. He'd looked. He hadn't bought anything, not because he was uncertain, but because he wanted to be sure. And he'd needed those additional 3 weeks to understand that being sure was exactly what he was. He was sure. He'd lost Sarah suddenly and without warning, and the lesson that experience had burned into him, the one that grief eventually teaches if you stay in it long enough to hear it, was that certainty was not the same as guarantee. You could be certain about a person and still lose them. The certainty wasn't protection, but the alternative, holding back, managing the distance, not letting anything in because it might someday not be there. That wasn't living. He'd tried that for 4 years. He knew what it felt like. He knew what it cost. Victoria had said, standing in his kitchen, "I don't want to waste any more time." Neither did he. He finished his coffee, picked up his phone, called the jewelry store on Geary Street and asked them to hold the ring he'd looked at 3 weeks ago. The woman on the phone confirmed it. He hung up and sat there for another minute, and then he picked up the phone again and called his sister. "I'm going to ask her," he said when Renee answered. A pause. Not a calculating pause, a real one, the kind where a person is absorbing something. "When?" Renee said. "I'm working on it." "Have you told Lily?" "Not yet." "Caleb." Her voice had shifted, not to concern, but to something that he recognized as the older sister version of emotion, the one that came out sideways because Renee didn't do direct sentiment without significant cause. "I met her last month." "I know you did. I liked her." "I know." She was... He could hear Renee searching for the word. She was real. That's what I kept thinking. She was just real with us. No performance. She sat at my kitchen table and argued with Tom about city zoning for 45 minutes and held her own completely. Caleb smiled at the memory. He'd been at that dinner, Renee and her husband Tom in Sacramento, a Sunday afternoon visit 3 weeks ago. Tom had opinions about city planning the way some people had opinions about sports teams, loudly and with complete conviction, and Victoria had engaged him with the same direct precision she brought to everything and had not conceded a single point she didn't believe in, and Tom had emerged from the argument slightly red-faced and clearly delighted. "She argued better than you do," Renee had said afterward, privately, to Caleb. "Everyone argues better than I do," he'd said. "That's true," she'd agreed. "But you picked someone who can hold her own. That's good. That's what you needed." He thought about that now. What he'd needed. He'd spent a long time not knowing what he needed, or knowing it only in abstract terms. Someone present, someone real, someone who didn't need him to be different than he was. Someone who took up actual space in a life and required the same in return. Victoria took up space. She had opinions and edges and silences that still occasionally required navigation. She went quiet at the wrong moments and sometimes presented conclusions without the process that led to them. She kept things close for longer than was strictly necessary, and sometimes the door took more time than it should to settle into its frame. She was not easy in the ways that would have been convenient. She was easy in those ways that actually mattered, in the specific relief of being with someone who was simply, straightforwardly herself. That, he had come to understand, was the rarest thing. "Tell me when you know the plan," Renee said. "I want to know." "You'll know," he said. He picked Lily up from school that afternoon, and she was in the particular mood that she got after a good day. Talkative, bouncing slightly, carrying too many things because she'd forgotten to leave her library books at the library. She talked for the entire drive home about a class project on ecosystems and a disagreement she'd had with her friend Maya about whether fungi were more important than plants, and her position, which she defended with considerable energy, was that fungi were doing things that plants couldn't and didn't get enough credit for it. "You're advocating for the fungi," he said. "Someone has to," she said. "Have you texted Victoria about this?" "She's in a meeting." "When has that stopped you?" Lily considered this. "She said she'd get back to me during the break." A pause. "She thinks fungi are underrated too." "Of course she does." He made dinner. Lily did homework at the kitchen table with the focused distraction of a person who was technically doing homework while also very much thinking about fungi. Victoria texted at 7:15. Out? Later? He replied, yes. Simple. The shorthand of two people who had stopped needing more than that. She came at 8:30, after Lily was technically in bed and practically reading with a flashlight, a situation Caleb had chosen to pretend he was unaware of. Victoria came in with the specific energy of a person who had been in meetings for 7 hours and had survived but found the experience costly, and she sat down at the kitchen table and accepted the tea. He put in front of her with the particular gratitude of someone who has not been offered tea by someone who knows how they take it in a long time and still finds it, each time, slightly surprising. Board approved the restructuring, she said. The version I proposed, not Raymond's. Raymond was the senior partner who had been pushing the efficiency restructuring that would have eliminated the junior positions. The 3 positions stay, Caleb said. The 3 positions stay. She wrapped both hands around the mug. He's not happy. He'll adapt. He'll look for another angle, she said. He always does. She looked at the table for a moment. I've been managing Raymond for 2 years. It's a specific kind of exhausting. Not because he's smart. He's not particularly smart. Because he's consistent. He just keeps looking for the angle. What happens if you stop managing him? She looked up. What do you mean? You've been playing the long game with him, waiting him out, managing around him, not giving him anything to push against. He leaned against the counter. What happens if you just remove the structure he's operating inside? Make a move he's not positioned for? She was quiet for a moment, turning the mug in her hands. He recognized the specific quality of her silence, not closed off, but active, working. There's a board review in March, she said slowly. For senior partner performance metrics. Normally it's just a formality. Could it be more than a formality? She looked at him. You're suggesting I use the March review to establish documented performance standards that Raymond has a pattern of not meeting. I'm suggesting you stop playing his game on his timeline. She was quiet for another moment. Then, that's actually a better move than what I've been doing. You came up with it. I just said, stop managing him. I did the rest. The corner of her mouth moved. You're annoyingly good at that. At what? Asking the one question that reorganizes everything. He sat down across from her. It's an elevator repair thing. You look at the error code and then you ask what the error code is actually reporting, because it's usually not the real problem. It's the symptom. She looked at him with an expression that was, he'd learned to read it by now, the full vocabulary of her face, something between fondness and the slight frustration of someone who finds another person's clarity both useful and occasionally disarming. Raymond is a symptom, she said. Raymond is a symptom, he agreed. She drank her tea. They sat at the kitchen table and talked about her company, about the building in the Richmond district and the landing sensor, about Lily's position on fungi, which Victoria confirmed she supported on the grounds that mycorrhizal networks were genuinely one of the more remarkable things in the natural world and deserved more attention than they received in standard curricula. He told her about the grocery store, about the apple, about the moment in the checkout line. She went still in the way she did when something landed somewhere important. You bought me an apple, she said. Without thinking about it, he said. Which is the point. She looked at the table, then at him. I reorganized my calendar last week, she said. I do it every month. Look at the standing commitments, decide what stays. And I noticed that... She stopped. I'd already accounted for you in the places where I usually have margin. It was just there. Already there. The kitchen was quiet. The heat came on somewhere in the building, the familiar click and hum. We've been doing this for almost a year, he said. Yes, and it's... He looked at her. It's the most honest thing I've been part of since Sarah. I want you to know I know that. Her expression did something complicated. Caleb, I'm not building to something, he said. I want to say it out loud sometimes, that this is real to me, that you're real to me. I spent a long time not saying things because saying them makes them something you can lose, and I'm done with that reasoning. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were very steady, the way they got when she was being careful about something she meant. "You're real to me too," she said. "You and Lily both." A pause. "I didn't know. I'd stopped believing a version of this was possible for me. Not consciously. I didn't sit down and decide that. It just became the assumption that this particular thing wasn't going to be part of my life." She looked at her hands. "And then you walked over to me at a networking event and said something about bruschetta." He laughed, the short, involuntary one. She smiled, the real smile, the quick one. "I'm serious," she said. "It was the most ordinary beginning possible, and it rearranged everything." She looked at him. "I'm grateful for ordinary. I didn't think I'd get to have ordinary again." He went to the jewelry store on Geary Street the following Saturday morning, while Lily was at a school friend's house, and Victoria was at her office catching up on work she'd let slide during the week. He picked up the ring. A simple thing, not flashy, a single stone in a clean setting, chosen because it looked like something she would actually wear rather than something designed to make a statement. Victoria didn't make statements with objects. She made them with how she showed up. He drove home with it in the inside pocket of his jacket and did not look at it again that day. He didn't need to. He knew what it was and what it meant and what he was going to do with it. He just needed to figure out the how. He spent 3 days thinking about the how. Derek, who had found out through the mysterious social osmosis by which Derek always found out about things, showed up at Caleb's workbench on a Wednesday with the energy of a man who had strong opinions and had been exercising tremendous restraint in not sharing them. "Are you going to do something big?" Derek asked. "Like a thing? A big thing?" "I'm going to do the right thing," Caleb said. "Which is different from a big thing." "Can it also be a big thing?" "Derek, I'm just saying people like a gesture." "Victoria doesn't like gestures," Caleb said. "She likes things that mean what they appear to mean." He checked the cable tension he was measuring. "She's had a lot of experience with gestures that didn't mean what they appeared to mean." Derek was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then, "Okay," he said. "So what does it mean?" Caleb set down his tool. "It means she's not who people decided she was when they looked at her. It means who she actually is, what she's actually done, who she's been when nobody was making it easy. Deserves to be seen." He picked the tool back up. "That's what it means." Derek stood there for a moment. His face did something that Caleb chose not to comment on. "You're a good man, Cal," Derek said. "I know I said something dumb early on. I'm sorry about that." "You apologized already." "I know. I'm doing it again." Derek straightened up. "She's lucky." "We're both lucky," Caleb said. "That's the point." He knew by Thursday what the how was going to be. It wasn't his idea exactly. It was Lily's. Not that Lily knew it, not that she'd been consulted. It came from something she'd said months ago, almost a throwaway line, standing in the parking lot of Westbrook Elementary after the reading fair with her new book under her arm. Victoria came back to a place she didn't have great memories of, and she came anyway. He hadn't stored it consciously. It had just stayed in him, the way the things children say sometimes stay, direct and clear and pointing at something true. The Millbrook Community Center. The same hall. The same room where 200 people had spent an evening treating her like a cautionary tale, where she'd stood at the back wall with her chin lifted and a water glass she wasn't drinking, where he'd walked over for no reason he could have articulated except that it was the obvious thing to do. She hadn't been back. She'd told him that months ago. "I went to one." That was enough. He wanted to take it back, not erase it. You couldn't erase things, and he'd stopped believing in the value of pretending you could. But he wanted to go back to that room with her, stand in it differently, let it mean something new. Let the last thing that room contained, when she thought of it, be something worth thinking about. He called the community center on Thursday. The coordinator, same woman with the clipboard and the microphone enthusiasm, happened to have a private room booking available on a Saturday 3 weeks out for a small event. Caleb explained briefly what he had in mind. She was quiet for a moment. "We do get requests for proposal events," she said. "Let me look at the setup." "I don't need much," he said. "I need the room and about an hour." "And guests?" He thought about this. "A few," he said. "People who should be there." He called Renee that evening. She said yes before he finished the sentence. He texted Derek, who replied with a series of messages that contained very few words and several entirely unnecessary exclamation points. He called Mrs. Kowalski, who said she would bring a casserole, and was told that was not necessary, and said she would bring a smaller casserole. He thought about who else to tell, and then he thought about what Victoria had said. My social world is not large. And about Joanna, her assistant, who had apparently wanted a full report. He got Joanna's number from Victoria's phone on a Saturday afternoon under the cover of needing to make a call when his own battery was dead, which was entirely true and also convenient. He texted Joanna that evening. This is Caleb Parker. I need your help with something. Please don't tell Victoria. Joanna's reply came in 45 seconds. I have been waiting for this text. What do you need? He told her. She told him she would handle Victoria's schedule for that Saturday, which apparently fell during a period when Victoria had a standing commitment that Joanna would quietly reschedule without explanation. She also said she was going to tell Priya from the Literacy Coalition because Priya had been asking about Victoria since the benefit dinner and deserved to know. He said that was a good call. Joanna said she had a lot of good calls, that was what she was paid for, and also she was going to need a full account of the evening afterward. He told Lily on a Thursday, 2 weeks before. He sat her down after dinner with the seriousness the moment required, and she sat across from him at the kitchen table with her hands folded and her mother's eyes and waited. I'm going to ask Victoria to marry me, he said. Lily was quiet for a moment. I know she's not your mom, he said, and I'm not asking her to be. Nothing about what she is to you gets decided by me. That's yours to figure out on your own timeline. He looked at his daughter. But I want you to know what I'm doing, and I want to know what you think. Lily looked at the table. She was doing the thing she did when something required actual consideration. The real, unhurried version, not the quick processing she did for problems that weren't complicated. Do you love her? Lily asked. He hadn't used that word yet, to Victoria, to anyone. He'd been living in it for months without naming it, the way you sometimes occupy a room for a long time before you learn what it's called. Yeah, he said. I do. Lily nodded slowly. Does she know? She knows, he said. Not the word, but she knows. Another pause. She makes you different, Lily said. Not, you're still you, but you're more you. Like a you with the volume turned up a little. He looked at his daughter. Mom was like that too, Lily said. She had that. She made everything around her a little more. She looked at the table, and he saw something move across her face. Not grief exactly, or not only grief, something more complex and more true. Victoria's not Mom, but she has that, the making things more. She looked up at him. So yes, I think you should. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held his, briefly, and then pulled back and picked up her fork with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a 9-year-old who has said what she had to say and was returning to her dinner. Can I be there? She asked. When you ask her? I was planning on it, he said. You're part of why. Lily nodded, satisfied. She ate 3 more bites and then said, I think Victoria's going to cry. Maybe. She doesn't cry easily, Lily said. But when she does, it'll be the real kind. She considered. That's the good kind. The Saturday arrived with the particular quality of days that matter, not brighter or more dramatic than ordinary days, just there, solid and real. Victoria thought they were going to the Millbrook Community Center for a Literacy Coalition planning meeting that Joanna had put in her calendar, a cover story that was credible because Victoria attended coalition events regularly and Joanna managed her schedule with unquestioned authority. Caleb had spent the morning in a state that was not quite nervousness and not quite calm, somewhere in between, the specific feeling of a person who has made a decision they're certain about and is now simply waiting for the moment to arrive. He wore the navy suit again. Not the same shirt, a better one that Renee had sent him in a package 2 weeks ago with a note that said for when you do the thing and nothing else. He'd ironed it the night before, twice, and gotten it right on the second try. Lily wore the blue dress with the braids. You look nice, she told him, with the matter-of-fact assessment of someone whose standards he'd been trying to meet his whole parenting life. You too, he said. I know, she said, and picked up her book for the car ride, which was the most Lily thing she could have possibly done, and which made him love her so much it was almost structural. He picked Victoria up from Pacific Avenue. She came down through the lobby in a dark coat he'd seen before, her hair back, and she got in the car and looked at him with the mild curiosity of someone who had noted that he was dressed formally for a coalition planning meeting, but had chosen not to comment yet. Joanna said this was a venue walkthrough, she said. Sort of, he said. She looked at him. Caleb, just come see. She was quiet for the rest of the drive, which was not the silence of someone oblivious, but the silence of someone who had noted several data points and was waiting for more before forming a conclusion. Lily sat in the back seat and read her book with the focused innocence of a child who was absolutely not reading her book. The Millbrook Community Center parking lot was half full. Through the glass double doors, Caleb could see the warm light inside, the string lights, the movement of people. The same lobby, the same hall. He'd been back once, to check the setup, to make sure the room felt right. It did. He got out of the car. Lily got out. Victoria stood on the pavement and looked at the building, and he watched her face do the thing he'd first seen it do 11 months ago. The careful calibration, the recognition, the slight tightening. This is the community center, she said. Yes. The same? Yes. She looked at him. Her face was doing something more complicated now. Why? Come inside, he said, and you'll see. She walked in with him, through the glass doors across the lobby, through the door to the main hall, and he felt the moment she took it in. The people who were there, the ones he'd brought together in the same room that had once been the place she'd stood alone at the back wall. Renee and Tom, who had driven down from Sacramento. Mrs. Kowalski, who had brought a small casserole despite instructions, and who was standing near the back with the expression of a woman who had earned the right to be here by sheer accumulation of casseroles over 4 years. Derek, dressed in a suit that fit him considerably better than he was comfortable with, standing with his wife. Joanna, who was exactly as competent and direct in person as she was in text, standing near the front and watching Victoria's face with the expression of someone who has orchestrated something and is invested in its landing. Priya from the Literacy Coalition, who had started quietly crying approximately 30 seconds after arriving, a fact she was managing with variable success. And in the center of it, the room that had once held 200 people who had decided something about Victoria Sterling based on a visible fact about her face. Victoria stood very still. These are your people, Caleb said quietly. Some of mine, some of yours, and some who are both now. He stood beside her. I wanted you to come back to this room, not because of what happened here, but because of what's going to happen here instead. She was looking at the room, at the people, and her face was doing the thing that Lily had predicted. Not yet, but getting there. The careful composure working against something underneath it that was winning. Joanna caught her eye and nodded. Something private passed between them, years of working alongside each other compressed into a single look. Priya made a sound that was technically not a sob. Victoria turned to Caleb. Her eyes were very bright. Caleb, she said, I know what this room was for you, he said. I know what it felt like to stand in it. I was there. He turned to face her. And I want you to know that every room from here forward, I'm in it with you. Not in front of you, not behind you. With you. He paused. You have been the most honest person I have ever been around. You built something real when everything tried to reduce you to a scar and a story. You text my daughter about forensic fungi at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. A sound escaped Victoria that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, a complicated middle thing that was exactly what Lily had called it, the real kind. And you made this apartment feel like a home again, he said, and you didn't do any of it by being perfect. You did it by showing up, over and over. When it was hard, and when it cost you, and when you were afraid of it. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. I have one suit. I fix elevators. My daughter has very strong opinions about fungi, and I am more certain about this than I have been about anything since I watched my daughter take her first breath. He opened the box. The ring caught the light from the string lights above them. Small and simple and exactly right. Victoria was crying. The real kind. The the way Lily had said. Not performed, not managed, not the controlled version she'd shown to rooms that didn't deserve the real one. Just tears moving down her face, past the scar, which was there the way it was always there. A fact, a part of her, the least interesting thing about her. "Victoria Sterling," he said. "Will you marry me?" She looked at him for a moment, at his face, at the ring, at the room full of people who had shown up because they knew who she was and what she deserved. She looked at Lily, who was standing slightly to the side with her braids and her blue dress and her mother's eyes, which were also bright now, watching the way she watched everything, entirely, with the full weight of her attention, storing it. "Yes," Victoria said, not decorated, not performed, just the word, clear and true, in her voice that was lower than you expected and measured in a way that made you know she'd meant everything she'd ever said to you. He put the ring on her finger. It fit, because he'd asked Joanna for her ring size 3 weeks ago, and Joanna had provided it without comment, because Joanna was extremely good at her job. The room came alive around them. Renee made a sound that was definitely not crying, and was definitely crying. Derek put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled, because of course he did. Mrs. Kowalski said something in Polish that was probably congratulatory. Priya had fully given up managing the situation, and Lily walked up to Victoria and took her hand. Not her father's, Victoria's. It was a small thing, a child taking an adult's hand in a room full of people, but it was the kind of small thing that meant everything, the kind that contains in it all the large things that can't be said directly. The grief that didn't go away but was no longer the only truth in the room made for something new, the family that was made not from blood but from showing up and being real. Victoria looked down at Lily. Her face was a complete wreck, in the best possible way, tear-streaked and warm and open and entirely herself. "Hi," Lily said. "Hi," Victoria said. "I have a theory about the mycorrhizal network chapter," Lily said. "We can talk about it on the way home." Victoria laughed. A real one, wet with tears, the kind that comes out of you when you're too full of something to do anything else. She squeezed Lily's hand. "Deal," she said. Caleb stood in the center of the room and looked at the two of them, and then at the people around them. Renee, who had asked, "Are you actually ready for this?" and had been right to ask. Derek, who had said something dumb and apologized twice. Mrs. Kowalski and her unauthorized casserole. Joanna and Priya, who had never met each other before tonight and were standing together with the comfortable ease of 2 people who had both been in Victoria's corner for a long time without knowing it. He looked at the room itself. The same string lights, the same hall, the same geography that had once contained a particular kind of unkindness, thoughtless and ambient, and doing its damage in the way that ambient things do, without drama, just by accumulating. He thought about the things you couldn't predict when you sat in a parking lot in October, too tired for the evening ahead, almost going home. You couldn't predict that the person standing alone at the back wall would be the most real person you'd meet in years. You couldn't predict a child's text about forensic orchids, or a wobbly table or an apple in a grocery basket without being asked. You couldn't predict that the room that had once represented everything wrong could become, 1 year later, the room where everything changed again. Some things could only be understood backward. The meaning arrived after the fact, made visible by everything that followed. He thought about Sarah, not with the old hollow ache, but with something quieter and more honest. He thought about what she'd been and what she'd given him, and what he'd carried from her into every room since. The capacity to actually see people. The belief that walking towards someone who was being made invisible was the only sensible thing to do. Lily's eyes, her laugh, her conviction that reading too much wasn't a thing. Sarah had not been a prologue. She had been herself, fully and completely, and what they'd had been real and whole and its own finished thing. And this, what he was standing in the middle of right now, in a hall with string lights and people who loved these 2 women and a 9-year-old holding a hand she'd chosen to hold. This was also its own thing. Not a sequel, not a recovery, not the resolution of a wound, a beginning, just a beginning, with all the uncertainty that entailed and all the work still ahead of it, and none of the guarantee that anyone ever got about anything. Enough. More than enough. Victoria looked at him over Lily's head, and her face was the real face. The one he'd watched emerge over 11 months, layer by layer, as the rooms got safer and the cost got lower, and she stopped having to hold everything together quite so hard. The face that lived underneath all the careful architecture. The one that was, it turned out, entirely worth waiting for. He crossed the room and put his arm around her, and she leaned into him. Not dramatically, not like a person collapsing into something, but the way you lean against something solid when you've been standing on your own for a very long time and you finally decided to stop. "Okay," he said quietly. She turned her head and looked at him. The ring was on her finger. The room was full of people who knew who she was. His daughter was still holding her hand. "Yeah," she said, "I'm okay." And she was. Not the managed, maintained, holding it together version of okay that she'd been carrying around for 6 years like a structure built from discipline and necessity. The real kind. The kind that didn't require any work to sustain, that just was what it was because the conditions for it had finally arrived. Outside, the city went on doing what it always did. The traffic, the noise, the indifferent ongoing business of a place that contained millions of people and noticed none of them specifically. In buildings across the city, elevators ran their cables up and down their shafts, reliable and unthought of, carrying people between floors without ceremony. In East Side schools, children who had been behind grade level were reading above it, in programs funded by a woman most of them would never meet. In a parking lot 11 months ago, a man had sat in a truck and almost driven away. Almost. The word that separated the life you had from the one you nearly didn't. He hadn't driven away. He'd gotten out of the truck and walked through the glass doors and stood slightly off to one side and watched, and then he'd walked toward a woman at a back wall and said something ordinary about bruschetta, and the rest of it had followed. Imperfectly, messily, beautifully. The way the rest of it always follows when you make the one right decision to stop managing your distances and let something in. That was the whole story, really. That was all it ever was. You show up, you see the person, you walk over. Everything else is just what happens next.